What happens when a man with nothing left to lose becomes the only hope for peace between two worlds at war? In the scorching borderlands where mercy is a myth and survival means bloodshed, drifter Caleb Rourke finds himself bound and kneeling before a tribal council that holds his life in their hands. When the chief's daughter steps forward to claim him, not as prisoner, but as bridge between warring worlds, Caleb's fate transforms into something far more dangerous than death: redemption. This is a story of courage, sacrifice, and the impossible choices that define us. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The desert had a way of stripping men down to their bones. Caleb Rourke had learned that truth the hard way, through years of sun-scorched trails and nights cold enough to freeze the marrow. He'd learned it through loss, the kind that carved hollows in a man's chest where hope used to live. And now, with his hands bound behind his back and dried blood crusting his temple, he was learning it all over again. The rope bit into his wrist as rough hands shoved him forward. His boots dragged through sand still hot from the day's brutal sun, though dusk was bleeding purple across the horizon. Around him, 4 other captives stumbled and cursed, their faces twisted with the particular terror of men who'd never expected their luck to run out. Caleb kept his silence. He'd been ambushed 3 miles south of the canyon pass, riding alone as he always did. The attack had come fast. Arrows first, then riders emerging from the rock formations like smoke given form. He'd reached for his rifle, but a stone-tipped arrow had punched through his shoulder before his fingers found steel. The pain had been white-hot and immediate, but he'd stayed in the saddle until a rope around his neck jerked him backward into the dust. Now his shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, the arrowhead still buried deep in muscle. But pain was an old companion. He'd learned to breathe through it, to let it wash over him like rain. The camp sprawled across a natural basin, protected on 3 sides by rust-colored cliffs that glowed like embers in the fading light. Hide-covered structures dotted the landscape, some small and temporary, others larger and clearly permanent. Smoke rose from cooking fires, carrying the smell of roasting meat and unfamiliar spices. Children's laughter echoed somewhere in the distance, a sound so normal it seemed to belong to another world entirely. Warriors lined their path, faces painted with ochre and ash, eyes hard as flint. Some held bows with arrows already nocked. Others gripped war clubs adorned with feathers and bone. Every one of them watched the captives with the cold assessment of predators measuring prey. The man beside Caleb, a prospector named Dutch, who'd been traveling the same route, started to whimper. "Jesus Christ, they're gonna scalp us. They're gonna—" "Shut your mouth," Caleb said quietly, not looking at him. "Fear's a luxury we can't afford right now." Dutch's whimper turned into a choked sob, but he went quiet. They were pushed toward the center of camp where a large fire pit had been prepared. Flames danced and crackled, throwing wild shadows across the assembled crowd. Elders sat in a semicircle, their weathered faces inscrutable. Women stood behind them, some holding children, others with their arms crossed and expressions stern. The warriors formed an outer ring, a wall of muscle and steel, and barely contained violence. And at the center of it all, on a raised platform of stone and timber, sat a man who could only be the chief. He was older than Caleb had expected, perhaps 60 winters, his long hair more silver than black. His face a map of deep lines earned through decades of sun and hardship. But his eyes were sharp, missing nothing, and his posture radiated the kind of authority that didn't need to announce itself. He wore a vest of worked leather decorated with intricate beadwork, and around his neck hung a collar of bear claws that clicked softly when he moved. A younger warrior stepped forward, grabbed Dutch by the hair, and forced him to his knees. The other captives were similarly thrown down until all 5 knelt in the dirt before the chief's platform. Caleb went to his knees without resistance, conserving his strength, watching everything. The chief stood slowly, and immediate silence fell across the camp. Even the children stopped their playing. He descended from the platform with measured steps, his moccasins making no sound on the packed earth. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the space, deep and resonant, with an accent that shaped the English words carefully. 5 men, he said, looking at each captive in turn. 5 men who cross lands not their own. 5 men who take what they have not earned, who kill what they do not honor, who bring their wars to our doorstep. Dutch tried to speak, but the warrior behind him pressed a blade to his throat. The prospector froze, fresh tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. The chief continued, "For generations, my people have watched your kind spread like locusts. You build your towns on our sacred grounds. You slaughter the buffalo until the plains run red. You sign treaties with words sweeter than honey, then break them before the ink is dry." He paused, letting the words settle like stones into deep water. "And still you come. Always you come." One of the other captives, a young ranch hand barely out of his teens, started to sob openly. "Please, we didn't mean no harm. We were just—" "Silence!" The command cracked like a whip. The chief's eyes blazed. "I do not wish to hear your excuses. I have heard them all before, in 100 different voices, and they are all the same. Always, you did not mean harm. Always you were just passing through. Always you are the victim of circumstance." He turned slowly, addressing not just the captives, but his entire tribe. "Our young warriors cry for blood. They have watched their brothers die on your bullets. They have seen their sisters taken, their children starved, their way of life destroyed piece by piece. They ask me, why do we hesitate? Why do we show mercy to those who have shown us none?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some of the younger warriors raised their weapons, their faces fierce with barely restrained rage. "And they are right," the chief continued, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. "Justice demands blood for blood. Tradition demands that those who violate our lands pay with their lives." Caleb felt Dutch start to shake beside him, heard the ranch hand's prayers dissolve into incoherent babbling. But Caleb kept his eyes forward, his breathing steady. If these were to be his last moments, he'd face them the way he'd faced everything else, clear-eyed and unbroken. The chief's gaze swept across them again, and this time it lingered on Caleb. Something flickered in those ancient eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred quality. "But I'm old," the chief said finally, "and I have seen enough death to last 100 lifetimes. I have buried sons and daughters, wives and brothers. I have sent warriors to battle knowing they would not return. I have made peace with other tribes only to watch them scattered to the wind by your armies." He stopped directly in front of the captives, so close Caleb could see the silver in his beard, the old scars that crisscrossed his hands. "So I will offer something different, something that may be weakness or maybe wisdom. Time will tell which." He raised his voice again, projecting to the entire camp. "One of these men will be chosen, not for death, but for life. One will be taken into our tribe to learn our ways, to prove that peace between our peoples is possible." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Warriors shouted in protest, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of anger and disbelief. The elders remained silent, their faces thoughtful, but many of the younger tribe members surged forward, their objections loud and clear. "This is madness," one warrior shouted in his native tongue. Though Caleb didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear enough. "They deserve nothing but death. We should send their heads back to their settlements as a warning. Father, you cannot seriously consider—" "Enough!" The chief's voice thundered across the camp, silencing the objections. "I am still your chief. I still lead this tribe, and when I speak, you will listen." He turned slowly, meeting the eyes of his people, one by one. "I know your anger. I share it. But anger alone has never built a future worth living in. It has only built graves." Into the tense silence that followed, a figure moved from the shadows near the chief's platform. Caleb's attention snapped to her immediately. A young woman, perhaps 25 winters, moving with the grace of a hunting cat. She wore deerskin leggings and a tunic decorated with porcupine quills, her long black hair braided with leather strips and small bones. But it was her face that caught and held his attention. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh to the truth beneath, and an expression of absolute determination. She walked to her father's side and placed a hand on his arm. They exchanged words in their language, too quiet for Caleb to hear. The chief's expression softened slightly, though the iron in his spine remained. He nodded once, then stepped back, yielding the space to her. The young woman turned to face the captives. When she spoke, her English was flawless, each word precisely articulated. "I am Ayla, daughter of Chief Dakota. For years I have listened to the council debate what to do about your people. I have watched us retreat, adapt, compromise, and still lose ground. I have lost brothers to your guns, watched my mother die of diseases you brought to our lands. Her voice remained steady, but Caleb could hear the steel beneath. But I have also listened to my father's wisdom, and I believe him when he says that we must try a different path. She walked along the line of kneeling men, studying each face. Dutch couldn't meet her eyes. The ranch hand was still crying, his lips moving in silent prayer. The other two captives stared at the ground, shoulders hunched, waiting for judgment. Then she reached Caleb. He looked up and met her gaze directly. Held it. In that moment, something passed between them. Not understanding exactly, but recognition. She saw a man who wasn't begging, wasn't making excuses, wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. And he saw a woman who carried the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders with the same grim determination he'd once carried a rifle. This one, Ayla said clearly, pointing at Caleb. I choose this one. The camp erupted again. Voices rose in protest and confusion. The chief raised his hand for silence, but this time it took longer to achieve. Warriors argued with elders. Women called out questions. The chaos built and swirled like a dust storm. Dutch grabbed Caleb's arm, his eyes wild. What did you do? What the hell did you do? Caleb said nothing. He didn't know the answer himself. Finally, Chief Dakota's voice cut through the noise. It is decided. My daughter has chosen. This man, he gestured to Caleb, will be brought into our tribe. The others will be taken beyond our borders and released with this warning. Tell your people that we seek peace, but we will defend our lands with every breath in our bodies. Tell them that the old ways of taking what you want are over. Tell them that if they come in friendship, they will be met with friendship. But if they come with violence, he let the sentence hang, unfinished but clear as a blade's edge. Two warriors hauled Dutch and the other captives to their feet. They were dragged away, still protesting, still weeping, their voices fading into the gathering darkness. Caleb watched them go, feeling oddly disconnected from his own fate. He'd expected death, had made peace with it, in fact. This, whatever this was, felt like being thrown from a horse into a river whose current he couldn't yet judge. A warrior cut the ropes binding his wrists. Blood rushed back into his hands, bringing pins and needles that made him grit his teeth. Then strong hands gripped his arms and hauled him upright. The arrow wound in his shoulder screamed, and for a moment his vision grayed at the edges. He swayed, but didn't fall. Ayla stood before him now, close enough that he could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes. Can you walk? She asked. I can walk, Caleb said. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended, scraped raw by thirst and dust. Then follow me. She turned and started toward one of the larger structures near the edge of camp. After a moment's hesitation, Caleb followed, acutely aware of the eyes tracking his every step. Warriors glared at him with open hostility. Mothers pulled their children close as he passed. The message was clear. He was here on sufferance, not welcome. The structure Ayla led him to was built of timber and hide, larger than the others, with decorative symbols painted on the entrance flap. She pushed through without ceremony, and Caleb ducked inside. The interior was dimly lit by a small fire in a central pit, smoke rising through a hole in the roof. The space was organized with military precision. Sleeping pallets along one wall, storage baskets along another, weapons hung with care above the doorway. It smelled of sage and smoke, and something else, something green and alive that he couldn't quite place. An older woman sat by the fire, grinding something in a stone bowl. She looked up as they entered, her eyes sharp and assessing. She and Ayla exchanged rapid words in their language. The older woman's expression remained neutral, but she nodded and rose, gathering supplies from one of the baskets. Sit, Ayla commanded, pointing to a spot near the fire. Caleb lowered himself carefully, his shoulder protesting every movement. The older woman approached with a bundle of materials, cloth, water, and what looked like dried herbs. She knelt beside him, and without warning, grabbed the arrow shaft protruding from his shoulder. Caleb's hand shot out, catching her wrist. Wait. The woman's eyes widened slightly, not in fear but in surprise that he dared to touch her. Ayla stepped forward, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. Grandmother Itu is a healer. She needs to remove the arrow. Unless you'd prefer to die of fever in 3 days? Caleb released the woman's wrist. Just wanted to know what was coming, he said evenly. I'm ready now. Grandmother Atu said something that might have been approval or might have been a curse. Caleb couldn't tell which. She examined the wound more carefully, prodding the flesh around the entry point with experienced fingers. Then she looked at Ayla and spoke several sentences. The arrowhead is lodged against bone, Ayla translated. It must be cut out. This will hurt. Most things worth doing hurt, Caleb replied. Ayla almost smiled. Almost. Remove your shirt. Caleb unbuttoned his tattered shirt with stiff fingers, peeling the fabric away from the dried blood. The movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating through his shoulder, but he kept his breathing steady, controlled. The shirt fell away, revealing the full extent of the wound, a ragged hole surrounded by purple-black bruising, the broken arrow shaft jutting out at an angle. Grandmother Atu made a clicking sound with her tongue, clearly unimpressed with the damage. She selected a thin blade from her supplies, obsidian, by the look of it, napped to an edge sharper than any steel. Then she handed Caleb a piece of leather. Bite, she said in heavily accented English. He took the leather, placed it between his teeth, and nodded once. The blade bit deep. Caleb's vision exploded into white-hot stars. Every muscle in his body locked rigid as Grandmother Atu cut around the arrowhead with quick, precise movements. He could feel the blade scraping against bone, could feel warm blood running down his chest and back. The pain was enormous, overwhelming, threatening to pull him down into darkness. But he'd survived worse, had endured loss that cut deeper than any blade. He focused on breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, in, out, each breath a small victory against the agony trying to drown him. Grandmother Atu worked with the calm efficiency of long practice. She widened the wound, dug deeper, her fingers following the blade. Then with a movement so quick Caleb almost missed it, she grasped the arrowhead and yanked it free. The world tilted. Caleb's jaw clamped down hard on the leather, a muffled sound escaping his throat that was half groan, half growl. Blood poured freely now, running hot down his skin. Through the haze of pain, he felt Grandmother Atu pack the wound with some kind of paste that burned like liquid fire, then apply pressure with cloth bandages. It's done, Ayla's voice came from somewhere above him. The worst is over. Caleb spat out the leather, sucked in a deep breath. His hands were shaking, from blood loss or adrenaline or both. Appreciate the warning, he managed. This time Ayla did smile, just a fraction. You didn't scream. Most men scream. Most men haven't had practice in keeping quiet when it counts. Something shifted in her expression, curiosity replacing the careful neutrality she'd maintained until now. She knelt beside him, studying his face as Grandmother Atu continued bandaging the wound. What's your name? Caleb Rourke. Why were you traveling alone, Caleb Rourke? Safer that way. Safer for whom? He met her eyes. Everyone. She held his gaze for a long moment, as if weighing his words for truth. Finally, she nodded. Grandmother Atu says you'll live if infection doesn't set in. You'll sleep here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll discuss what comes next. Here, Caleb glanced around the structure again. This is your home. Yes. Won't that cause problems? Ayla stood, brushing dust from her leggings. Everything about your presence here will cause problems, Caleb Rourke. Where you sleep is the least of them. She moved toward the entrance, then paused and looked back. There's water in the vessel by the far wall. Food will be brought shortly. Do not attempt to leave this lodge. The warriors outside have orders to watch you. Some of them would be very happy if you gave them a reason to use their weapons. Understood. She studied him a moment longer, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't yet fully assembled. Then she ducked through the entrance flap and was gone. Grandmother Atu finished wrapping his shoulder, the bandages tight enough to hurt but necessary to stop the bleeding. She muttered something in her language, advice or admonishment, Caleb couldn't tell, then gathered her supplies and left as well, leaving him alone with the fire and his thoughts. Caleb sat very still, taking inventory of his situation. He was injured, unarmed, surrounded by people who had every reason to want him dead, and chosen for some purpose he didn't yet understand. His horse was gone, his gear confiscated, and the only thing standing between him and a knife in the dark was the word of a chief and the choice of his daughter. It was, objectively speaking, one of the worst positions he'd ever found himself in. And yet he was alive. when by all rights he should be dead. When every expectation had pointed toward a quick execution or slow torture, he was alive, breathing, given a chance he hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. The question was, why? He thought about the way Ayla had looked at him, that moment of recognition when their eyes met. She hadn't chosen him randomly. She'd seen something, decided something, though what exactly remained a mystery he'd have to solve if he wanted to survive whatever came next. The entrance flap stirred and a young boy entered carrying a wooden bowl. He couldn't have been more than 10 winters, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He set the bowl down near Caleb, then scurried back toward the exit, never taking his eyes off the strange white man sitting by his fire. "Thank you," Caleb said gently. The boy froze, clearly surprised to be addressed. He stared at Caleb for another heartbeat, then turned and fled. Caleb reached for the bowl with his good arm. It contained some kind of stew, meat, roots, and herbs in a savory broth. His stomach clenched with sudden, fierce hunger. He realized he hadn't eaten since early morning, nearly 18 hours ago. He ate slowly, savoring each bite despite the pain in his shoulder. The food was simple but well prepared, seasoned with unfamiliar spices that left a pleasant warmth on his tongue. As he ate, he listened to the sounds of the camp outside, voices rising and falling, the crackle of fires, the occasional bark of a dog, children being called to their evening meals. Normal sounds, human sounds. It was strange to think that just hours ago he'd been riding alone through empty country, believing himself to be beyond the reach of human connection. He'd chosen isolation deliberately after Sarah died, after the fever took her and their unborn child in the space of 3 brutal days. He'd chosen it because grief was easier to carry alone, because he couldn't bear to see his pain reflected in the eyes of others. But isolation, it seemed, was not a choice he could make forever. He finished the stew and set the bowl aside, then carefully lowered himself onto one of the sleeping pallets. The hide covering was soft, well cared for, and smelled faintly of cedar. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and exhaustion pulled at him like an undertow. Just before sleep took him, he heard voices outside. Ayla speaking with someone, their words too quiet to distinguish. Then silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the camp settling into night. Caleb closed his eyes and let the darkness take him. He woke to pre-dawn gray light and the sound of movement outside. His shoulder had stiffened during the night, the pain a constant throbbing presence that sharpened when he tried to sit up. He managed it anyway, gritting his teeth against the discomfort. The fire had burned down to embers. The lodge was empty except for him. The entrance flap pushed open and Ayla entered carrying an armful of wood. She paused when she saw him awake, then continued to the fire pit and began rebuilding the fire with practiced efficiency. "How's the shoulder?" "Hurts like hell, but I'll live." "Grandmother E2 will check it after the morning meal." She struck flint to tinder, coaxing flames from the embers. "There are clean clothes in the basket by the door. You'll need to change. Your current attire is inappropriate." Caleb looked down at his torn, blood-stained shirt. "Fair point. When you're dressed, come outside. My father wishes to speak with you." "What about?" Ayla looked at him over the growing flames, her expression unreadable. "About what you are now, and what you must become if you wish to survive here." She left before he could respond. Caleb found the basket she'd indicated. It contained deerskin leggings, a simple tunic, and moccasins. He changed carefully, his injured shoulder making every movement a challenge. The clothes fit well enough, though they felt strange against his skin, unfamiliar in cut and texture. He caught sight of his reflection in a polished piece of metal hanging on the wall. A stranger stared back at him, half transformed already. He pushed through the entrance flap into cool morning air. The sun hadn't yet cleared the canyon walls, leaving the camp in soft twilight. Cooking fires were being stoked, women grinding grain, children being roused from sleep, life continuing in its eternal rhythms. Warriors watched him from their posts, hands never far from weapons. A few elders sat outside their lodges, smoking pipes and observing his every move with eyes that missed nothing. The message remained clear. He was here on trial, not as a guest. Ayla stood near the central fire pit, speaking with her father and several other elders. She beckoned Caleb over when she saw him. Chief Takota regarded him with the same penetrating stare from the night before. The morning light revealed more details. The silver in his hair braided with bone beads, the ceremonial scars on his forearms, the weight of leadership that sat on his shoulders like a physical thing. "You survived the night," the chief observed. "That is a beginning." "Grateful for it," Caleb replied. "Gratitude is easy. Action is harder." Dakota gestured to the camp around them. "You see my people. What do you observe?" It was clearly a test. Caleb took his time, looking carefully. "I see organization, discipline. Everyone has a role, and they fulfill it without needing to be told. I see children who play but also learn, already practicing with small bows, helping with daily tasks. I see warriors who are alert but not aggressive, ready but not eager for violence." He paused. "I see a people who've learned to survive in a world that wants them gone." Something flickered in Dakota's eyes. Approval, perhaps. "And what do you think my people see when they look at you?" "Honestly, they see everything that's tried to destroy them. They see broken treaties and burned villages and graves that should never have been dug. They see me, and they see every wrong that's been done to them by men who look like me." "Yes," Dakota said simply. "They do. And some of them will never see anything else, no matter what you do or how long you stay. Some wounds cut too deep to heal." He stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "My daughter chose you. I allowed it, despite the protests of my council, despite the anger of my warriors. Do you know why?" "No, sir. Because I am old enough to know that we are losing. Not today, perhaps not even in 10 winters, but we are losing year by year, mile by mile. Your people are a flood, and we are stones in the current. We can stand firm for a time, but eventually—" He made a gesture that encompassed both futility and inevitability. "So I must try something different, must find a way to make peace without surrendering everything we are. And you think I can help with that? I think you are here. I think you are alive when you should be dead. I think my daughter, who is wiser than many warriors twice her age, saw something in you worth preserving." Dakota's expression hardened. "But seeing potential and fulfilling it are different things. You will be tested, Caleb Rourke. Every day, every hour. You will be watched and judged and found wanting by many. And if you fail, if you prove to be just another faithless white man with honey on his tongue and poison in his heart, I will kill you myself." The words were delivered without heat, simply a statement of fact. "Understood," Caleb said. "Then understand this as well. You are no longer a captive, but neither are you free. You are between. You will work alongside our people, learn our ways, prove your worth through action. You will be given the same food, the same shelter, the same chances as anyone else. But you will also be held to a higher standard because you carry the weight of your entire race on your shoulders." Dakota's gaze was unrelenting. "Fair? No. But neither is the world we live in. I'm not asking for fair. Just a chance to prove I'm more than what's expected." Ayla spoke for the first time since Caleb had joined them. "Then your first task begins now. Come with me." She led him away from the central fire, toward the eastern edge of camp where corrals had been built for horses. Several young warriors were there, repairing fence rails damaged in a recent storm. They looked up as Ayla and Caleb approached, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. One of them, a tall man with scars crossing his chest and arms, stepped forward. "You cannot mean to have him work with us, Ayla. This is warriors' work." "This is the work that needs doing," Ayla replied calmly. "And Caleb will help do it." The scarred warrior, whose name Caleb would later learn was Makya, turned his cold gaze on Caleb. "He is injured, weak. He will only slow us down." "Then you'll have to work harder to compensate," Ayla said with a hint of steel in her voice. "My father's decision stands. Caleb is here to contribute, and contribute he will." Makya's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. As Ayla walked away, the warrior moved close to Caleb, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I watched my brother die with a settler's bullet in his chest," he said quietly in English. "I held him as his blood soaked into the earth. So know this, white man. I will watch you. And the moment you give me reason, the moment you prove false, I will cut your throat and sleep soundly that night." Caleb met his eyes steadily. "If I prove false, I won't blame you for it." Makya studied him for a long moment, searching for weakness or deception. Finding neither, he turned away and picked up a coil of rope. Then let us see if you can work, or if you only know how to talk. The day that followed tested Caleb in ways the arrow wound never could. His shoulder screamed with every movement, every lift of a fence rail, every swing of a hammer. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool morning air, and more than once his vision grayed at the edges from pain and exhaustion. But he gritted his teeth and kept working, matching the warrior's pace as best he could with one arm effectively useless. They gave him no quarter. When he struggled to lift a heavy timber one-handed, they didn't help, just watched to see if he'd quit. When he had to stop and breathe through a wave of dizziness, they exchanged knowing looks that said, "See, weak," just as we thought. But Caleb didn't quit. He found ways to compensate, using his legs more, positioning his body to leverage his good arm, taking 2 trips when one would have sufficed for an uninjured man. The work was clumsy, inefficient, but it got done. And slowly, very slowly, the warrior's expressions shifted from outright hostility to something more complex. They still didn't trust him, still watched his every move, but the contempt faded slightly, replaced by a grudging acknowledgement that he at least wasn't afraid of hard work. By midday, Grandmother Itu appeared with water and food. She changed his bandages with the same brisk efficiency as before, clicking her tongue at the fresh bleeding, but not commenting on it. Then she left, and the work resumed. The sun climbed higher, and with it came the desert's punishing heat. Caleb's new clothes were soon soaked with sweat. His hands, soft from weeks of riding, began to blister and then bleed. The pain in his shoulder built to a constant roar that he had to actively suppress to keep his hands from shaking. But he worked. Makia and the other warriors conversed in their own language, occasionally glancing at Caleb, clearly discussing him. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, skeptical, testing, waiting for him to fail. Late afternoon brought a water break. The warriors sprawled in the shade of the completed fence, passing a water skin between them. Caleb stood apart, giving them space, his breath coming hard and his vision swimming slightly from heat and pain and exhaustion. One of the younger warriors, barely more than a boy, really, stood and brought the water skin to Caleb. "Drink," he said in halting English. "Thank you." Caleb took a long swallow, the water impossibly sweet and cool despite the heat. He handed it back and the young warrior hesitated, then spoke again. "I am called Chaitan. You work hard. For white man." It wasn't quite a compliment, but it wasn't quite an insult either. Progress of a sort. "Trying to earn my keep," Caleb said. Chaitan studied him with open curiosity. "Why you not run? Last night, when alone in lodge. Why not try escape?" "Where would I go?" "Back to your people." Caleb shook his head slowly. "Don't have people to go back to." "Haven't in a long time." The young warrior frowned, processing this. Then Makia called something sharp in their language, and Chaitan hurried back to the group, the moment of connection broken. But it had happened, however brief, however small. The work continued until sunset painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. Finally, Makia declared the fence complete and dismissed the work crew. The warriors gathered their tools and headed toward the central camp, their voices tired but satisfied with the job well done. Caleb followed at a distance, his legs trembling with exhaustion, his shoulder a mass of agony that made each step a conscious effort. He'd pushed too hard, too fast, and his body was making him pay for it. But he'd completed the day's work, hadn't quit, hadn't complained, hadn't given them ammunition to use against him. Small victories. He made his way back to Ayla's lodge, nearly stumbling through the entrance. Inside, he found a basin of clean water waiting, along with fresh bandages and more of Grandmother Itu's medicinal paste. A simple message: take care of yourself, because we won't coddle you. He cleaned the wound as best he could one-handed, gritting his teeth against the burn of the medicine. Fresh blood had soaked through the old bandages, and the skin around the wound was hot to the touch. Not good signs, but not unexpected either. He'd survived worse infections before. Would probably survive this one too, if he was careful. He just finished rebandaging when Ayla entered, carrying 2 bowls of evening stew. She set one beside him, then settled cross-legged on the other side of the fire pit. "Makia says you worked hard today," she said, breaking the silence. "Makia says that, does he?" A hint of amusement touched her lips. In his way, he said you are stubborn as a mule and twice as ugly, but you don't quit when things are difficult. High praise coming from a man who wants to slit my throat. Don't mistake caution for personal hatred. Makia is a warrior. He's watched his people suffer at the hands of settlers for years. To him, trust must be earned in blood and time, not given freely to strangers. She ate a spoonful of stew, watching him over the flames. But he also respects strength, and you showed strength today, working through injury that would have stopped lesser men. Caleb ate his own stew, grateful for the warmth and sustenance. Your father said I'd be tested. I'm guessing today was just the beginning. Today was nothing, Ayla said bluntly. Today you proved you can swing a hammer while wounded. Tomorrow, and the day after, and every day beyond, those will be the real tests. Because stubbornness only carries a man so far. Eventually you'll need more. You'll need to understand us, to see the world as we see it, to become part of something larger than yourself. And if I can't? She held his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting firelight. Then you'll fail. And when you fail, the warriors who are already looking for reasons to end this experiment will have all the justification they need. The weight of her words settled over the lodge like a physical presence. Caleb understood what she was really saying. His life depended not just on survival, but on transformation, on becoming something he'd never been before. Why did you choose me? He asked quietly. Of all those captives, why me? Ayla set down her bowl, considering the question carefully. You want the truth? Always. Because you were the only one who wasn't afraid. She leaned forward slightly, intensity burning in her expression. The others begged, cried, made promises they would never keep. They saw us as savages, as obstacles to be overcome or escaped from. But you looked at us and saw people. You knelt in the dust expecting death, and you faced it with your eyes open and your dignity intact. She paused, choosing her next words with care. I've watched many men die, Caleb Rourke. Warriors who fought bravely, settlers who died cursing our names, travelers who simply found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I've learned that a man's true nature shows clearest in those final moments. Most men become small when death approaches. They bargain, they beg, they try to make themselves victims deserving of mercy. Her eyes never left his. But you didn't. You accepted responsibility for being where you were, doing what you were doing. You didn't ask for mercy you hadn't earned. That's not virtue, Caleb said quietly. That's just acceptance. I've already lost everything worth living for. Death didn't scare me because there wasn't much left to lose. Perhaps, Ayla acknowledged, but that kind of acceptance, that willingness to face consequences without flinching, is rare. And it's exactly what's needed if this mad experiment of my father's is to have any chance of success. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the camp settled into evening routines. Voices calling goodnight, fires being banked, the daily rhythm of a community putting itself to rest. Finally, Caleb spoke again. You said you lost brothers to my people. Ayla's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. 2 brothers. Takahi fell in a skirmish 3 winters ago, killed by a cavalry patrol that opened fire without warning. Ahanu. She paused, and for the first time since Caleb had met her, he saw the mask slip slightly. Ahanu was younger than Chayton, 12 winters. He caught the coughing sickness that your people brought. We had no medicines that could help. I held him for 3 days while he struggled to breathe, while his lungs filled with fluid. On the 3rd night, he stopped fighting. The words were delivered calmly, almost clinically, but Caleb heard the ocean of grief beneath them. I'm sorry, he said, knowing the words were inadequate but offering them anyway. Are you? Ayla's gaze sharpened. Sorry enough to help prevent it from happening again? Sorry enough to stand between our worlds and try to build something better than endless cycles of revenge? I don't know if I'm capable of that, Caleb admitted, but I'm willing to try. Then that will have to be enough, for now. She stood, gathering the empty bowls. Rest. Tomorrow, you'll work with the women, learning to preserve meat and prepare hides. The day after, you'll train with the younger warriors in basic skills. Every day, a new challenge. Every day, another chance to prove yourself, or to fail. She moved toward the entrance, then paused and looked back. And Caleb? The wound in your shoulder is festering. I can smell it from here. When Grandmother Atu comes in the morning, let her do what needs to be done, even if it hurts. Pride is a luxury we can't afford anymore." Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the dying fire and his thoughts. Caleb lay down on his pallet, staring up at the smoke hole in the ceiling where stars were beginning to emerge in the deepening darkness. His shoulder throbbed with a sick, feverish heat that meant infection was indeed setting in. By morning, he'd probably be fighting a full-blown fever. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, he was alive. He'd survived his first day, and somewhere in this camp of strangers who had every reason to hate him, a young woman named Ayla had chosen to believe he might be more than the sum of his people's sins. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something, Caleb had learned long ago, was infinitely better than nothing. The fire burned down to embers, and eventually, despite the pain, sleep claimed him. His last conscious thought was of Sarah's face. Not as she'd looked at the end, ravaged by fever, but as she'd been when they'd first met. Smiling. Full of hope for a future that would never come. Maybe, just maybe, he could build a different kind of future here. Or maybe he'd die trying. Either way, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else since Sarah died. One breath at a time, one step at a time, until either the path ended or he did. Outside, the camp slept under a blanket of stars. Warriors kept watch on the perimeter, their eyes scanning the darkness for threats. And in her father's lodge, Ayla lay awake, wondering if her choice would save them all, or doom them. Only time would tell. The fever came in the darkest hours before dawn, when the world hung suspended between night and day. Caleb woke to find himself drenched in sweat, his shoulder burning like someone had pressed a hot iron against the bone. The lodge spun around him, shadows dancing in patterns that made no sense. And for a disorienting moment, he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then memory flooded back. The ambush, the choice, the day of backbreaking work that had torn open wounds barely begun to heal. He tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. His limbs felt heavy, disconnected, as if they belonged to someone else. The fever had him in its grip now, and experience told him it would get worse before it got better. The entrance flap stirred, and Grandmother Atu entered as if summoned by his distress. She moved to his side with surprising speed for a woman her age, her weathered hand pressing against his forehead. She clicked her tongue in disapproval, then called out sharply in her language. Moments later, Ayla appeared, her hair loose around her shoulders, sleep still clinging to her eyes. Those eyes sharpened immediately when she saw Caleb's condition. She and Grandmother Atu exchanged rapid words, their voices urgent but controlled. "The infection has spread," Ayla said, kneeling beside him. "Grandmother Atu needs to reopen the wound, drain it, and pack it with stronger medicine. It will be worse than before." Caleb managed a nod, his teeth starting to chatter despite the heat radiating from his body. "Do what needs doing." Grandmother Atu was already preparing her tools, heating a blade in the fire until it glowed faintly red. She spoke to Ayla, who translated. "She says the fever will make the pain harder to bear. Your mind will not be your ally in this." "Understood," Caleb managed through chattering teeth. What followed was a descent into hell measured in heartbeats and screams he couldn't quite suppress. Grandmother Atu cut deep, draining pus and infected blood, while Caleb's world reduced to a single point of agony that seemed to expand until it filled the entire universe. He was dimly aware of Ayla holding him down, her hands surprisingly strong as his body convulsed. Heard himself making sounds that weren't quite human. Felt the world tilt and spin as darkness pulled at the edges of his vision. And then, mercifully, the darkness won. He woke to daylight streaming through the smoke hole and Ayla's face hovering above him. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he caught a flicker of something that might have been relief. "How long?" His voice came out as a rasp. "A day and a night. The fever broke this morning." She held a cup to his lips. "Drink, slowly." The water was cool and tasted faintly of herbs. He drank until she pulled the cup away, then let his head fall back against the pallet. Every muscle in his body ached, and his shoulder felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with ground glass, but the sick, feverish heat was gone. "Grandmother Atu says you'll live," Ayla continued, setting the cup aside. "Though she also says you're too stubborn to know when to rest properly." You pushed yourself too hard yesterday. Had something to prove. Yes, and you nearly proved it by dying in my lodge and creating a diplomatic incident. There was no heat in her words, just a kind of exasperated resignation. The work will still be there when you're healed. My father doesn't expect you to kill yourself demonstrating your worth. What does he expect? She considered the question carefully. Consistency. Reliability. The willingness to show up day after day and do what needs doing without fanfare or excuses. Flash and fire burn bright and quick. We need someone who burns steady and long. Caleb absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. How long until I can work again? Grandmother Etu says 3 days minimum. But knowing you, you'll be up and moving by tomorrow, consequences be damned. She stood, brushing dust from her leggings. There's food by the fire. Eat, rest, and try not to be a complete fool about your recovery. Where are you going? To hunt. Our stores are running low and the autumn migration has begun. I'll return before nightfall. She paused at the entrance. Chayton will check on you while I'm gone. Don't give him any trouble. Then she was gone, leaving Caleb alone with his thoughts and the slow, painful process of recovery. True to her word, Chayton appeared shortly after midday, carrying fresh water and a bundle of dried meat. The young warrior's nervousness was evident in the way he kept glancing toward the entrance, as if expecting someone to catch him in the act of kindness. Ayla say I bring this, he said, setting down his burdens. Say you need strength back. Appreciate it, Caleb said, pushing himself into a sitting position despite the protest from his shoulder. You don't have to stay if you've got other things to do. But Chayton didn't leave. Instead, he settled cross-legged near the fire, his curiosity apparently overcoming his caution. You really have no people to go back to? He asked after a moment. No family, no tribe. No one. What happened to them? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to share. Finally, he said, My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her and our child both. My parents passed when I was young. No brothers, no sisters, just me. Chayton's expression shifted to something closer to understanding. I too know this loss. My mother died when I was small. Father killed in raid 2 winters past. Ayla's mother, she take me in, raise me like own son until the coughing sickness take her too. Seems like loss is something we all share, regardless of where we come from. Yes, but Chayton struggled with the words, his English faltering. Your people cause much of our loss. Bring sickness, bring guns, bring broken promises. Hard for my people to see you and not see all of that. I know, and I can't change what others have done. Can't bring back the dead or undo the wrongs. Caleb met the young warrior's eyes. All I can do is try to be better than what's expected. Try to prove that not all men who look like me are cut from the same cloth. Chayton nodded slowly, processing this. Then, with the directness of youth, he asked, Why you let Ayla choose you? Could have fought, tried to escape in darkness. Instead you accept. Because running wouldn't have changed anything. I'd still be alone, still be drifting, still be carrying grief I can't set down. At least here, Caleb paused, searching for the right words. At least here there's a chance to be part of something, to matter again, even in a small way. The young warrior studied him with an intensity that seemed beyond his years. Makia say you are dangerous, not because you are violent, but because you make people want to trust you. You say this is how your people have always won. Make us trust, then betray. Makia is not wrong to be cautious. Trust should be earned, not given freely. But you want us to trust you? I want to earn the right to be trusted. There's a difference. Caleb shifted position, wincing as his shoulder pulled. Trust isn't something you can demand or manipulate out of people. It's built through action, through showing up day after day, through keeping your word even when it costs you something. Chayton was quiet for a moment, then stood. I must go. But I think maybe Ayla choose well. Time will tell. He moved toward the entrance, then looked back. When you're stronger, I teach you some words in our tongue. Will help when others speak and you understand nothing. I'd like that, thank you, Chayton. After the young warrior left, Caleb forced himself to eat despite his lack of appetite. He knew his body needed fuel to heal, needed strength to face whatever tests still lay ahead. The dried meat was tough and heavily seasoned, but it settled well in his stomach. He washed it down with the herbal water, then spent the afternoon in a half-doze, letting his body do the work of recovery. He woke to the sound of voices outside. Ayla had returned from her hunt. He could hear her speaking with someone, her tone animated in a way he hadn't heard before. Curious, he pushed himself upright and moved slowly to the entrance, peering out. Ayla stood near the central fire with two other women, all three of them working to butcher a young elk. Their hands moved with practiced efficiency, separating meat from bone, setting aside organs and hide for different purposes. They talked as they worked, their conversation flowing easily in their own language, occasionally punctuated by laughter. It struck Caleb how different Ayla seemed in this moment. Lighter somehow, the weight of responsibility temporarily set aside. This was her world, her people, her home. And he was the intruder who disrupted that harmony through no choice of his own. One of the women glanced up and saw him watching. She said something sharp to Ayla, who turned to look. The lightness faded from her expression, replaced by the careful neutrality she wore around him like armor. "You should be resting," she called out. "Needed air," Caleb replied, leaning against the doorframe to take weight off his legs. "Impressive kill. The herd came early this year. We were fortunate." She said something to the other women, who nodded and took over the butchering. Ayla wiped her bloodied hands on a cloth, then walked over to where Caleb stood. Up close, he could see the flush of exertion on her face, the satisfaction of a successful hunt. "How's the shoulder?" "Better. Still hurts like hell, but the fever's gone." "Good. Because tomorrow, fever or not, you start learning our language properly. You can't integrate if you can't communicate beyond the handful of us who speak English." She studied him critically. "Can you walk to the river?" "Think so? Why?" "Because you smell like a sick room, and if you're going to start spending time around others, basic hygiene would be appreciated." There was a hint of amusement in her tone, taking the sting from the words. "Come on, I'll make sure you don't fall in and drown." The walk to the river tested the limits of Caleb's recovery. His legs trembled with each step, and by the time they reached the water's edge, sweat had broken out across his forehead, despite the cool evening air. But he made it without collapsing, which felt like a small victory. The river ran clear and cold, fed by mountain springs somewhere to the north. Ayla pointed to a secluded bend where trees provided privacy. "There. I'll stand watch to make sure no one disturbs you. And before you object, you can barely stand on your own. If you slip and hit your head, you'll drown before anyone finds you. So swallow your pride and accept the help." Caleb wanted to argue, but recognized the truth in her words. He nodded, made his way carefully down the bank, and began the awkward process of undressing one-handed. The cold water was a shock when he finally stepped in, but it cleared his head and eased some of the ache from his overworked muscles. He scrubbed himself as best he could, washing away the sweat and sickness of the past 2 days. The water stung his healing shoulder, but it was a clean pain, honest and uncomplicated. For the first time since the ambush, he felt almost human again. When he emerged, Ayla had left fresh clothes on a rock nearby. Not the ones he'd worn before, but new garments made of softer hide decorated with simple beadwork along the seams. He dressed slowly, his movements still clumsy with exhaustion and injury. Ayla was waiting where she'd said she'd be, her back to him, giving him privacy. When he approached, she turned and assessed him with a critical eye. "Better. You look less like death warmed over." High praise. "Don't let it go to your head." She started back toward camp, and Caleb fell into step beside her, matching her pace despite the effort it required. "Tomorrow, you'll meet with Grandmother Itu's sister, Mika. She teaches children our language, helps them learn the old stories. She's agreed to work with you, though she made it clear she thinks the entire endeavor is foolish. Seems to be a common opinion around here. Can you blame them? You're asking an entire people who've been betrayed repeatedly to trust you on faith alone. That's not a small thing." Ayla stopped walking, turning to face him. "But I'll tell you what I told the council when they questioned my choice. Faith isn't given blindly. It's built on small moments of truth. Every time you show up when you could run. Every time you work when you could shirk. Every time you honor your word when breaking it would be easier. Those moments accumulate. They become the foundation of something stronger than blind trust. They become earned respect." And if I fail, if I can't live up to that, then you fail, and my father will deal with the consequences of my poor judgment. But I don't think you will. She held his gaze, her dark eyes searching his face. You've already lost everything once. You know what it costs to have something worth protecting and watch it slip away. That knowledge, that scar, it makes you different from men who've never faced real loss. It makes you careful with the second chances you're given. Caleb had no response to that. The insight cut too close to the bone, revealed too much of the truth he'd been carrying alone for 3 years. They walked the rest of the way in silence, arriving at camp as the sun touched the horizon. Fires were being lit, families gathering for evening meals, the timeless rhythm of community continuing regardless of the stranger in their midst. Over the next 3 days, Caleb's life fell into a pattern that was equal parts grueling and illuminating. Each morning, he met with Mika, a woman even older than Grandmother Etu, with eyes that missed nothing and a teaching style that brooked no laziness. She worked him through the basics of the tribal language, making him repeat words and phrases until his tongue ached and his head spun. No, 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 she would say, clicking her tongue in disapproval. The sound comes from here, she tapped her throat, not from your lazy settler mouth. Again. And Caleb would try again, stumbling over consonants that didn't exist in English, vowels shaped differently than anything he'd learned as a child. Mika showed no patience for his struggles, but beneath her harsh exterior, he sensed something else, a genuine desire to see him succeed, if only to prove that the old ways could still teach new students. The children who normally studied with Mika watched these lessons with unabashed fascination. They giggled when Caleb mispronounced words, turning simple greetings into accidentally crude phrases that sent them into fits of laughter. But they also corrected him, competing to be the first to catch his mistakes, turning his education into a game that kept them all engaged. By the 3rd day, Caleb could manage basic courtesies, greetings, thanks, simple requests. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And more importantly, it showed the tribe that he was making an effort, that he wasn't expecting them to accommodate him entirely. The afternoons brought different lessons. Isla taught him how to properly treat hides, scraping away fat and tissue with tools made of bone and sharpened stone. The work required patience and precision. Too much pressure would tear the hide, too little would leave residue that would rot. His injured shoulder limited what he could do, but he learned to compensate, to use different angles and leverage. Our people waste nothing, Ayla explained as they worked side by side. The elk I killed, its meat feeds us. Its hide becomes clothing or shelter. Its bones become tools. Its sinew becomes thread. Its hooves are boiled for glue. Even its organs serve a purpose. To waste any part would be to dishonor the animal's sacrifice. Caleb watched her hands move with practiced grace, transforming death into utility. Your people have a different relationship with the land than settlers do, he observed. We understand that we're part of the land, not separate from it, not masters of it. She paused in her work, looking out across the canyon. Your people see land as something to own, to conquer, to extract value from. We see it as something we belong to, something we're responsible for preserving. That difference? It's at the root of everything that's gone wrong between our worlds. I know. I've seen it. Towns built without thought for sustainability, mines that poison rivers, forests cleared without replanting. Caleb set down his scraping tool. But I've also seen settlers who try to do better, farmers who rotate crops, ranchers who manage their herds responsibly. Not everyone is blind to the damage being done. Perhaps. But the blind ones have the power, and they use it without wisdom. Ayla returned to her work, her movements sharp with suppressed frustration. Sometimes I wonder if my father's dream of peace is even possible. How do you bridge a gap that wide? How do you find common ground when one side sees the land as sacred and the other sees it as commodity? I don't know, Caleb admitted, but giving up guarantees failure. At least trying leaves room for possibility. She looked at him then, really looked, as if seeing him fresh. You've lost faith in many things, haven't you? But not in the idea that trying matters. It's all I've got left. The evenings brought the hardest test of all, sitting with the tribe during communal meals, enduring the weight of their stares and the chill of their silence. Some ignored him completely, as if he didn't exist. Others watched him openly, their expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. And a few, like Makya, studied him with the intensity of warriors assessing a potential threat. But slowly, incrementally, things began to shift. It started small. A child approached him during one meal, emboldened by Chaitan's example, and asked him to say a word in English. Then another child wanted to know if it was true that settlers had cities made entirely of stone. Before long, he was surrounded by a small crowd of youngsters, peppering him with questions while their parents watched warily from a distance. Caleb answered carefully, mindful that everything he said would be weighed and judged. He talked about cities, but also about the poverty within them, about trains and telegraphs, but also about the workers who died building them. He didn't try to paint his world as superior or even desirable, just different, with its own costs and consequences. One of the mothers eventually called the children away, but not before Caleb caught the slight softening in her expression. Not acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of something that might eventually lead there. Another breakthrough came during his language lessons. Mika had been drilling him on the words for different animals when he made a mistake that turned eagle into something approximating flatulent cloud. The children erupted in laughter, and even Mika's stern expression cracked into something that might have been amusement. "Your mouth is hopeless," she declared, "but your effort is adequate." Coming from Mika, adequate was high praise indeed. That evening, as Caleb sat by Ayla's fire working on a piece of hide she'd given him to practice on, she said, "Chaitan tells me you're making progress with the language. If you can call stumbling through basic phrases progress, then sure. I can, and I do. You've learned more in 3 days than most settlers learn in 3 years, if they bother to learn at all." She was working on repairing a bow, her hands steady as she shaped new sinew into the grip. "The children like you. That matters more than you might think. Children see through pretense in ways adults sometimes can't. If they sense falseness, they'll reject it instinctively." "And what do they sense in me?" Ayla considered this as she worked. "Sadness," she said finally, "but also honesty. You don't try to be something you're not. You don't make promises you can't keep. In a world where they've been lied to repeatedly, that kind of straightforward truth is novel. I'm just too tired to lie anymore. Used up all my lies on myself, telling myself I was fine when Sarah died, that I could handle the grief alone, that isolation was a choice rather than a surrender. And now? Now I'm here, in a place I never expected to be, surrounded by people I never thought I'd know, trying to build something from the ruins of everything I lost." He set down the hide, flexing his stiff fingers. "Feels less like choice and more like, I don't know, fate? Chance? Whatever it is that pushes people toward the lives they're meant to live rather than the ones they planned. My people would say the spirits guide us toward our purpose, even when we can't see the path ourselves." Ayla held up the repaired bow, testing its flex. "But I think it's simpler than that. I think we're all just stumbling forward, trying to find meaning in a world that doesn't hand it to us neatly packaged. Some of us stumble alone. Others find people to stumble alongside." Before Caleb could respond, Chaitan burst through the entrance, his face flushed with urgency. He spoke rapidly in his own language, the words tumbling over each other. Ayla's expression shifted immediately from contemplative to alert. She set down the bow and stood in one fluid motion. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. "Riders," Ayla said tersely. Coming from the southeast, armed, moving fast. She grabbed a bow and quiver from the wall. "Stay here. Don't go outside for any reason." "How many riders?" Chaitan counted 6, maybe more behind them. She was already moving toward the entrance. "If they're looking for you, if this is about you, then my father's peace may end before it ever truly began." Then she was gone, leaving Caleb alone with the weight of possibility settling over him like a shroud. 6 armed riders, coming fast. It could be coincidence, travelers, traders, anyone. But in his gut, Caleb knew better. They were coming for him. Caleb stood frozen in the empty lodge, every instinct screaming at him to move, to act, to do something other than wait like a caged animal while others decided his fate. Through the hide walls, he could hear the camp erupting into controlled chaos. Warriors being called to positions, children being hustled into shelters. The unmistakable sounds of a community preparing for potential violence. He moved to the entrance and peered through a gap in the flap. The sun had nearly set, painting the canyon walls in deep purples and reds. Warriors were taking positions along the camp's perimeter, bows strung and ready. He spotted Makia organizing a group near the main approach, his command sharp and precise. Ayla stood with her father on the central platform, both of them watching the canyon mouth where the riders would emerge. The waiting was worse than the fever had been. At least with the fever, he'd been able to fight something, even if that something was his own failing body. This helpless stillness felt like cowardice, like hiding while others faced danger that existed because of him. He was still wrestling with the decision when hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. 6 riders appeared at the mouth of the pass, exactly as Chayton had reported. Even from this distance, Caleb could see they were heavily armed. Rifles, sidearms, the swagger of men who expected trouble and were prepared to meet it with overwhelming force. The lead rider was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with a beard that reached halfway down his torso. Caleb's stomach clenched with recognition. Harlan Cobb, a bounty hunter who worked the territories, known for his persistence and his complete lack of moral flexibility. If Cobb was here, it meant someone had put a price on Caleb's head. But why? He'd committed no crimes, broken no laws. He was just a drifter who'd been in the wrong place when the ambush came. Unless... The memory hit him like a physical blow. 3 months ago, in a town whose name he could barely remember, there'd been an incident. A rancher's son, drunk and mean, had been beating a Chinese laborer in an alley. Caleb had intervened, pulled the kid off, sent him sprawling. The laborer had fled, and Caleb had moved on, thinking nothing more of it. But the rancher's son had hit his head on a hitching post when he fell, had lain unconscious in that alley for hours before anyone found him. And when he woke, he'd told a different story. Claimed he'd been attacked, robbed, nearly killed by a drifter who'd fled into the territories. The rancher was connected, wealthy, the kind of man who could afford to put bounty hunters on a trail. And Harlan Cobb was exactly the kind of hunter who'd take that job, no questions asked about the truth of the matter. Caleb's jaw tightened. So this was it then. The pass catching up, as it always did eventually. The only question was what happened next. Chief Dakota descended from the platform, Ayla at his side. They walked toward the riders with measured steps, radiating authority and calm, despite the tension crackling through the air. The tribal warriors held their positions but didn't raise their weapons, a statement of strength through restraint. Harlan Cobb reined in his horse 20 feet from the chief, his companions fanning out in a loose semicircle behind him. He looked around the camp with the assessing gaze of a man cataloging threats and vulnerabilities. When he spoke, his voice carried easily across the space. Chief Dakota, I presume. Name's Harlan Cobb. I'm tracking a man. White fellow, about 6 feet tall, dark hair, probably traveling alone. Goes by Caleb Rourke. You seen him? Dakota's expression remained neutral. Many men travel these lands. What business do you have with this one? Legal business. There's a warrant for his arrest out of Cedar Falls, assault and robbery. The man he attacked nearly died. Cobb shifted in his saddle, his hand resting casually near his rifle. Now, I don't want any trouble with your people. I respect your sovereignty here. But this man is wanted by the law, and I aim to bring him in to face justice. Justice, Dakota repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it bitter. An interesting concept coming from men who rarely extend it to my people. Cobb's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone level. I don't make the laws, Chief. I just enforce them. If you're harboring Rourke, I need you to turn him over, peaceful-like. Nobody needs to get hurt here. From his position in the lodge, Caleb made his decision. He couldn't let this escalate. Couldn't let these people who'd taken him in, however reluctantly, face violence on his behalf. The debt he owed to Sarah's memory, the promise he'd made to himself to be better than his grief, demanded that he face this himself. He pushed through the entrance before his courage could fail him. The reaction was immediate. Warriors swung toward him, weapons raising. Cobb's hand dropped to his pistol. Ayla's head snapped around, her eyes widening with something that might have been fear or fury or both. "Rourke!" Cobb called out, a satisfied smile spreading across his bearded face. "There you are. Saved me the trouble of searching." Caleb walked forward slowly, his hands visible and empty, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. He could feel every eye in the camp on him, could sense the tension ratcheting higher with each step. He stopped beside Dakota, meeting the chief's gaze directly. "This is my trouble," Caleb said quietly, "not yours. Let me handle it." Dakota's expression was unreadable. You are part of this tribe now. Your troubles are ours to share. With respect, Chief, I've been here less than a week. You don't owe me protection that could get your people killed. He's right about that, Cobb interjected. This is between me and Rourke. Rest of you can stand down, let us conduct our business, and we'll be out of your hair. Ayla stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. And what proof do you offer of these charges? What evidence beyond your word that this man is guilty of anything? Cobb pulled a folded paper from his coat. Got the warrant right here, signed by a judge, legal and proper. If you can read English, you're welcome to examine it. Ayla took the document, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. Caleb watched her face, saw the slight tightening around her mouth. When she looked up, her expression was controlled, but he could read the question in her eyes. Is this true? He gave the smallest shake of his head. Not the way they're telling it. This warrant claims Rourke attacked a man named Daniel Morrison in an unprovoked assault, Ayla said, her voice carrying across the camp. That he stole money and fled into the territories to avoid arrest. That's the shape of it, Cobb agreed. Now if you'd just... But it says nothing about why Rourke might have intervened, Ayla continued, cutting him off. Nothing about what Morrison was doing before this supposed attack. Nothing about witnesses or context or any attempt to hear Rourke's side of events. Cobb's smile faded slightly. The law requires evidence, not just accusations from wealthy men with connections. Ayla's eyes flashed. I've seen enough of your legal system to know how it works. Men with money and power can buy warrants as easily as they buy cattle. And men like you don't care about truth, only about collecting your bounty. Now hold on. No, you hold on. Ayla's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You ride into our lands, armed and aggressive, demanding we hand over someone under our protection based on a piece of paper that could say anything. You speak of law and justice while representing a system that has never extended either to my people. And you expect us to simply comply? The air had gone electric. Cobb's companions shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. The tribal warriors drew their bows tighter. One spark, Caleb realized, and this would explode into violence that would leave bodies on both sides. Ayla, Caleb kept his voice calm, steady. I appreciate what you're doing, but this isn't worth bloodshed. She turned to him, anger and something else, something that looked uncomfortably like concern, warring in her expression. You're just going to surrender? Let them take you back to face charges you didn't earn? I'm going to keep people from dying over my mistakes. He looked at Cobb. The warrant says Cedar Falls, right? That's 3 days' ride from here. I'll go with you peacefully. We'll sort this out with the judge, and nobody here gets hurt. That work for you? Cobb studied him suspiciously. Why the sudden cooperation? Most men in your position try to run or fight. Most men haven't spent the last week learning that there are things worth protecting beyond their own skin. Caleb glanced at Dakota. Chief, I'm sorry. I brought this to your door, and I'll take it away. Thank you for the chance you gave me. I hope... No. Dakota's single word cut through Caleb's speech like an axe through kindling. The chief turned to face Cobb directly. This man is under my protection. You will not take him. Chief, I really don't want... I know what you want, Bounty Hunter. You want easy money and a simple resolution, but there is nothing simple about this. Dakota's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You come to my lands with weapons and warrants, speaking of law, while ignoring every treaty your government has signed with my people. You demand I hand over someone who has sought sanctuary here, someone who has begun to earn his place among us. Cobb's face darkened. With all due respect, Chief, your protection doesn't supersede legal warrants. If you harbor him, you're breaking the law yourself. Your law, not mine. Dakota's stance didn't shift, but somehow he seemed to grow larger, more immovable. My law says that once someone is accepted into the tribe, they are ours to defend. That hospitality creates obligation, and obligation creates responsibility. This is crazy, one of Cobb's men muttered. We're wasting time talking. There's 6 of us, and 50 warriors with arrows trained on your hearts. Makia's voice rang out in heavily accented English. He'd moved into a position where Cobb could see him clearly, his bow drawn and steady. You count numbers? Count those. Count how many of us willing to die to protect what is ours. The standoff hung there, balanced on a knife's edge. Caleb could see Cobb calculating odds, weighing the bounty money against the risk of open conflict with a well-armed tribe. It was the calculation of a practical man, but practicality cut both ways. "There's another option," Caleb said into the tense silence. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Cobb and Dakota. "I'll go with you as far as the river, neutral ground. We'll talk there, just you and me, and I'll tell you exactly what happened in Cedar Falls. If you still want to take me in after that, I won't fight you, but I won't let this turn into a bloodbath either." "Caleb, no." Ayla's voice was sharp. "You don't owe these men anything." "No, but I owe the truth. And I owe this tribe a chance at peace." He met her eyes. "Trust me, please." Something in his expression must have convinced her because after a long moment she gave a slight nod. She turned to her father and spoke rapidly in their language. Dakota listened, his expression thoughtful, then responded. The exchange went back and forth several times before Dakota finally addressed Cobb again. "My daughter proposes a compromise. You and Rourke will meet at the river at dawn tomorrow. Alone, both of you. He will tell his story, you will hear it, and you will make your decision based on truth rather than paper and gold. If you still believe he should face these charges, he will go with you without resistance. But if you find his account credible, you will leave our lands and report to your employer that the man you sought could not be found." Cobb chewed this over, his beard working as he thought. Finally, he nodded. "All right. Dawn, at the river, just me and him. But I warn you, I'm not easily convinced by sob stories and excuses. I've heard them all before." "Then you'll hear one more," Caleb said. "That's all I'm asking." Cobb wheeled his horse around, his companions following suit. But before riding off, he looked back at Caleb. "If you run tonight, I'll be back with 20 men and a legitimate grudge, and this tribe won't be able to protect you from that kind of force." "I won't run." The bounty hunters rode out the way they'd come, disappearing into the gathering darkness. The moment they were out of sight, the camp erupted in overlapping voices, warriors demanding to know what had just happened, elders questioning the wisdom of the compromise, mothers herding children back to lodges now that the immediate danger had passed. Caleb found himself at the center of a storm of attention. Dakota raised his hand for silence, and gradually the voices died down. "We will discuss this in council," the chief announced. "For now, everyone return to your evening tasks. The danger has passed, at least for tonight." The crowd dispersed reluctantly, but the weight of their stares remained. Caleb could feel judgment pressing down from all sides, some sympathetic, most suspicious, all wondering if he'd just bought them temporary peace or inevitable war. Ayla gripped his arm, not gently. "Come with me. Now." She practically dragged him back to her lodge, her anger radiating off her in waves. Once inside, she rounded on him. "What were you thinking, walking out there like that? You could have gotten yourself killed. Better me than starting a war that would get your people killed. My people can defend themselves. Against 6 bounty hunters, sure. But Cobb meant what he said. He'd come back with reinforcements. And then what? How many warriors would die defending a man they barely know, barely trust?" Ayla's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You don't get to make that choice for us. My father offered you protection. That means something to our people. It creates obligations that go both ways. I know, and I'm honoring those obligations by making sure this doesn't escalate." Caleb sat down heavily on one of the pallets, exhaustion and pain catching up to him. "Ayla, I meant what I said out there. I won't let good people die for my mistakes." "Is it true?" Her voice had lost some of its heat, replaced by something harder to read. "What the warrant claimed? The assault?" "Yes and no. I did put hands on Daniel Morrison, but he was beating a Chinese laborer half to death in an alley. The man was on the ground, already unconscious, and Morrison was still kicking him. I pulled Morrison off, shoved him away. He was drunk, stumbled backward, hit his head on a post. I made sure he was breathing, then left before the town watch showed up." "Why not stay and explain?" "Because I've seen how those explanations go. Morrison's father owns half the county. The laborer was nobody, just one of the workers building the railroad. My word against Morrison's, and Morrison's word comes backed by money and lawyers and connections." Caleb's laugh was bitter. The justice system isn't designed to protect men like me, and it sure as hell isn't designed to protect Chinese laborers. Staying would have meant a show trial and a quick hanging. Ayla was quiet for a long moment, processing this. So you ran. So I drifted. Same as I'd been doing since Sarah died. Town to town, never staying long enough to put down roots or make connections. Easier that way, safer. He looked up at her. Until your people captured me and you decided I was worth something more than drifting. And now? Now I face the consequences of my choices. I tell Cobb the truth, hope he's man enough to see past the bounty money and accept whatever comes from that. Caleb's shoulder throbbed, a reminder of how tenuous his position was. At least this way, it's my choice, my consequences. Not dragging anyone else down with me. Ayla sat down across from him, her expression troubled. You're willing to sacrifice yourself to protect people who still don't fully trust you. Trust is earned through action, right? That's what you told me. Well, this is action. This is me proving that your choice to save me wasn't wasted on someone who only thinks about himself. Or it's you finding a noble way to give up. Her eyes searched his face. You said you'd lost everything when Sarah died, that there wasn't much left to lose. Maybe facing down Cobb tomorrow is just another form of surrender. The observation struck deeper than Caleb wanted to admit. Was she right? Was this courage or just exhaustion dressed up as nobility? He honestly didn't know anymore. Maybe it is, he admitted finally. Or maybe it's finally understanding that my life matters again, but only if I use it for something beyond my own survival. I don't know, Ayla. I'm just trying to do the right thing in a situation where every choice seems wrong. She stood, moved to the fire, and stood there staring into the flames. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. My father will want to send warriors with you tomorrow. Hidden, watching from a distance in case Cobb proves false. That could escalate things. That could save your life. She turned to face him. You don't get to be completely selfless about this, Caleb. You're part of this tribe now, whether you feel worthy of that or not. We protect our own. Even when our own might not deserve it? Especially then. Because deserve is a word we use to justify abandoning people when helping them becomes inconvenient. Her expression was fierce. I chose you. My father accepted that choice. The consequences of that decision are ours to bear together. Caleb wanted to argue, but he could see the futility in it. Ayla had made up her mind, and trying to change it would be like trying to turn a river with his bare hands. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet. If Cobb takes you tomorrow, if you disappear back into your world to face charges that may or may not stick, then this whole experiment ends before it ever really began, and I'll have to live with knowing I chose poorly. You didn't choose poorly. Whatever happens tomorrow, you gave me something I'd lost. You reminded me that connection matters, that purpose matters, that there are things worth fighting for beyond just surviving another day. Ayla's expression softened slightly. Pretty words from a man facing a bounty hunter at dawn. I've had practice at pretty words. Sarah always said I could talk my way out of anything if I tried hard enough. The memory brought a bittersweet smile. Of course, she also said I was too stubborn to know when talking wouldn't work. She sounds wise. She was. Is. Her memory still is, anyway. Caleb stood, testing his legs. I should rest. Tomorrow's going to be complicated. Yes, it is. Ayla moved towards the entrance, then paused. Caleb, when you meet Cobb tomorrow, don't just tell him the truth about Cedar Falls. Tell him the truth about why you stayed here instead of running when you had the chance. What good would that do? It would show him that you're not just running anymore, that you found something worth staying for, worth protecting, worth becoming better for. Men like Cobb, they respect strength, and sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose to stand still instead of fleeing. She left before he could respond, leaving him alone with the fire in his thoughts and the weight of tomorrow pressing down like a physical thing. Caleb didn't sleep much that night. He lay on his pallet, watching smoke rise through the hole in the roof, listening to the sounds of the camp settling around him. Footsteps passed by occasionally, warriors on watch, making sure he didn't try to run. Whether they were protecting him or preventing his escape, he couldn't say. Maybe both. Somewhere past midnight, the entrance flap shifted and Chayton slipped inside. The young warrior carried a bundle, which he set down near Caleb's pallet. Cannot sleep? Chayton asked quietly. Not much point in trying. My mind's too loud. Chayton nodded as if he understood completely. He gestured to the bundle. Brought you something. For tomorrow. Caleb unwrapped it to find a bow and a quiver of arrows, along with a knife in a beaded sheath. All of them showing signs of careful use and maintenance. These were someone's working tools, not ceremonial pieces. Chayton, I can't. You go to meet armed man with nothing but words. Words are good, but the young warrior mimed shooting a bow. Sometimes need more than words. These are mine. I want you to carry them, just in case. If I show up armed, Cobb will think I'm planning something. So hide them, nearby where you can reach if need be. Better to have and not need than need and not have. Chayton's expression was earnest. You protect us today when you step out. We protect you tomorrow. Is fair trade. Caleb was moved by the gesture more than he could articulate. This young warrior who'd lost family to people who looked like Caleb, who had every reason to want him gone, was offering him weapons and protection. Thank you, Chayton, truly. The young warrior grinned, some of the tension breaking. Also, Grandmother Etu say, if you get yourself killed, she wastes good medicine on you and she will be very angry, is scary when angry. Despite everything, Caleb laughed. I'll do my best not to waste her medicine then. After Chayton left, Caleb examined the weapons more carefully. The bow was well made, balanced, the string properly waxed and tight. The arrows were straight, the fletchings intact. The knife was sharp enough to shave with. Tools of survival, offered freely by someone who owed him nothing. He lay back down, the weapons within easy reach, and finally managed to find a few hours of restless sleep. Dawn came cold and clear, the sky lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold. Caleb rose, dressed in the clothes Ayla had given him, and checked his shoulder. The wound was healing cleanly now. The angry red infection faded to healthy pink. Grandmother Etu's medicine had done its work. He strapped on the knife where it wouldn't be immediately visible, but could be reached quickly if needed. The bow and quiver he would stash near the river before meeting Cobb. He stepped out of the lodge to find half the camp already awake. Warriors and elders gathered near the central fire. Dakota stood waiting, Ayla beside him. You still intend to do this? The chief asked. I do. Then hear me, Caleb Rourke. You carry more than your own fate to that river. You carry the possibility of peace, the weight of my daughter's choice, and the hopes of those who dare to believe that men can be better than their worst impulses. Dakota's gaze was steady. But you also carry our protection. Makia and 3 others will be positioned in the rocks above the river. They will not interfere unless Cobb proves false to the agreement, but they will be watching. Chief, this is not negotiable. You are one of us now. We do not send our people to face danger alone. Dakota placed a hand on Caleb's good shoulder. Go, speak your truth, and know that whatever happens, you have earned your place here through your actions these past days. Ayla stepped forward, pressing something into his hand, a small carved stone, warm from being held. For strength, she said quietly. My mother gave me this when I was young, told me it held the courage of all the women in our line. I want you to carry it today. Caleb looked down at the stone. It was carved with symbols he didn't recognize but could feel the significance of. Ayla, this is too important, which is exactly why you should carry it. Bring it back to me when this is done. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the mask of careful neutrality dropped completely. Come back, Caleb. We're not finished with you yet. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that captured the gratitude and connection and hope he felt in that moment. But words felt inadequate, so he simply nodded and closed his hand around the stone. The walk to the river took 20 minutes. The sun was just clearing the canyon walls when Caleb arrived at the meeting spot, a wide bend in the river where the water ran slow and deep over smooth stones. He stashed the bow and quiver behind a fallen log, keeping only the knife. Then he waited. Harlan Cobb appeared right as the sun's first rays hit the water, riding alone as agreed. He dismounted, ground-tied his horse, and walked to within 10 feet of where Caleb stood. In the morning light, Cobb looked older than he had the previous evening, tired, weathered by years of hard living and harder choices. All right, Rourke, I'm here. You've got my attention. Start talking. And Caleb did. He told the whole story, finding Morrison in that alley, the unconscious laborer, the moment of choice that had set everything else in motion. He told it simply, without embellishment or justification, just the facts as they'd happened. Cobb listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When Caleb finished, the bounty hunter was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the moving water. "You know what the problem is with truth?" Cobb finally said. "It doesn't matter half as much as people think it does. Morrison's father doesn't care about truth. He cares about revenge, about showing that nobody touches his boy without consequences. And I'm the consequences he bought. So you don't believe me?" "Oh, I believe you. I've met enough Daniel Morrisons to know the type. Entitled, mean, think their daddy's money makes them untouchable. And I've seen enough injustice to know the system ain't designed for fairness." Cobb turned to face Caleb directly. "But believing you and letting you go are two different things. I've got a contract, Rourke. I break it, my reputation's shot. Nobody'll hire me again. So we're at an impasse. Maybe. Or maybe we're at a moment where both of us get to choose who we want to be." Cobb gestured back toward the tribal lands. "Those people back there, they're willing to fight for you, to die for you. That's not nothing. That kind of loyalty, that kind of acceptance. A man doesn't find that twice in a lifetime. No, he doesn't. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe I rode all this way and couldn't find you. Maybe you'd already moved on before I got here, headed deeper into the territories where no bounty hunter with a lick of sense would follow. Maybe I head back to Cedar Falls, report that the trail went cold, and collect my fee for trying." Cobb's eyes narrowed. "But if I do that, if I give you this chance, you'd better damn well make it count. You'd better build something with those people worth the risk I'm taking." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. "You'd do that? Even though it could cost you future work?" "I'm tired, Rourke. Tired of chasing men who don't deserve chasing. Tired of enforcing laws that favor the rich over the right. Tired of being the weapon that powerful men use to punish anyone who challenges their control." Cobb sighed heavily. "Maybe letting you go is my way of choosing something different. Or maybe I'm just getting soft in my old age. Either way, this is your chance. Don't waste it." "I won't. You have my word." "Your word?" Cobb laughed, but there was no mockery in it. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have taken that as worth spit. But standing here seeing what you're willing to risk for people you barely know, maybe words backed by action do mean something after all. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Caleb took it. They shook, two men from different worlds finding brief common ground. "One more thing," Cobb said as he turned back toward his horse. "Morrison's father, he's persistent. He might send others when I report back empty-handed. So you'd best stay deep in tribal lands, keep your head down, and hope time cools his anger." "I'll remember that." "Thank you, Cobb." "Truly." The bounty hunter mounted his horse, then looked down at Caleb one last time. "Don't thank me. Just live well enough that I don't regret this decision. Fair enough?" "Fair enough." Cobb rode off, heading southeast toward Cedar Falls and whatever story he'd tell to explain his empty hands. Caleb stood by the river until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then allowed himself to breathe fully for what felt like the first time in days. Movement in the rocks above caught his attention. Makya emerged first, followed by 3 other warriors. They descended to the river's edge, their expressions a mixture of relief and residual suspicion. "You let him leave," Makya observed. "He let me stay," Caleb corrected. "There's a difference." Makya studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Not quite approval, but perhaps acknowledgement. "Come. Ayla will want to know you still breathe." The walk back to camp was strange. The warriors didn't speak to him, but neither did they keep their distance the way they had before. It was as if something had shifted, some invisible barrier had thinned if not quite broken. They found the camp in a state of alert readiness, warriors still positioned for defense, children kept close to their mothers. But when Makya called out that all was well, that Cobb had left and Caleb remained, the tension began to ease. Ayla was waiting near the central fire. When she saw him, something in her expression transformed, relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. She didn't run to him, didn't display emotion publicly, but when he handed back the carved stone, her fingers lingered on his for just a moment. "He let you go," she said quietly. He chose truth over gold, gave me a second chance I'm not sure I deserve, but sure as hell intend to earn. Chief Dakota approached, his presence commanding immediate attention from those gathered around. The bounty hunter has gone? Yes, sir. He said he couldn't find me, that the trail went cold. And you believe he won't return? I believe Harlan Cobb is a man who, when he gives his word, keeps it. But he warned me that Morrison's father might send others. I may have bought time more than freedom. Dakota nodded slowly, processing this information. Then he turned to address the assembled tribe, speaking in their language. Caleb couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. This was a chief explaining a decision, justifying a choice, asking his people to accept what had transpired. Some voices rose in agreement, others in protest, but Dakota's authority held, and gradually the crowd began to disperse, returning to morning routines and delayed tasks. The crisis had passed. For now. The days that followed Cobb's departure carried a different weight than those before. The crisis had revealed something fundamental, not just about Caleb, but about the tribe itself and the fragile experiment they were all part of. The camp settled back into its rhythms, but the rhythms themselves had changed, subtly but unmistakably. Caleb noticed it first in small gestures. A warrior named Takahi, not the brother Ayla had lost, but another man who shared the name, nodded to him across the central fire one morning. Not a greeting exactly, but an acknowledgement of existence that hadn't been there before. One of the women weaving baskets gestured for him to sit when he passed by, then handed him materials and showed him, through patient demonstration, the basic pattern. Children who'd watched him from a distance now approached more freely, asking questions in their halting English or his stumbling attempts at their language. The shift wasn't universal. Some still regarded him with open hostility, their faces hard whenever he passed. Caleb understood. Trust wasn't built in a single dramatic moment, no matter how cinematic. It was constructed piece by piece through consistency and time and actions that proved words weren't empty. But something had begun. A door had cracked open that morning by the river, and now it was Caleb's responsibility to prove he deserved to walk through it. Mika's language lessons continued, growing more complex as his basic vocabulary expanded. She moved from simple nouns and verbs into the territory of concepts, words for honor, obligation, belonging, loss. The language itself carried different assumptions than English, structured around relationships and responsibilities, rather than possessions and individuals. In your tongue, Mika explained one afternoon, you say, my horse, my land, my home. Everything is ownership, yes? I suppose so, Caleb agreed. In our tongue, these things are not owned. They are cared for. The horse allows you to ride. The land permits you to walk. The home shelters you. You have responsibility to them, not power over them. She tapped his chest with one gnarled finger. This difference, it shapes how you see the world, changes what you think is possible, what you think is right. The lesson stayed with Caleb long after the day's instruction ended. He thought about it as he worked alongside the others, repairing tools and structures damaged by early autumn storms. Thought about it as he practiced with the bow Chaitan had loaned him, learning to compensate for his still healing shoulder. The world Mika described, one based on reciprocal responsibility rather than dominion, felt both foreign and strangely compelling. Sarah would have liked it here, he caught himself thinking one evening. She'd always been uncomfortable with the rigid hierarchies of settler society, the way wealth and power determined worth. She'd wanted to build something different, a home where people mattered more than property. They'd talked about it in those last months before the fever, making plans they'd never have the chance to fulfill. The memory still hurt, but the pain had changed quality. Less like a fresh wound, more like an old scar that ached in certain weather. Progress, of a sort. Ayla noticed the change in him during one of their evening conversations. They'd fallen into a pattern. After the day's work ended, they'd sit by her fire and talk. Sometimes about practical matters, sometimes about deeper things. She'd tell him stories from tribal history, and he'd share memories of his life before. An exchange of contexts, building bridges between very different worlds. You're starting to understand it, she said that particular evening, watching him work on a piece of leather he was shaping into a water flask. Understand what? Why we fight so hard to preserve this way of life. Why we're willing to die rather than be absorbed into your world of individual ownership and isolated struggle. She added wood to the fire, sparks rising into the darkening sky. It's not about being primitive or refusing progress. It's about knowing there are different ways to be human, different ways to organize society, and some of those ways are worth fighting for. Caleb set down his work, giving her his full attention. I'm beginning to see that, yes. Though I'll admit, it's strange. I spent 3 years believing the only way to survive grief was isolation. Convinced myself that connection just meant more opportunities for loss. And now? Now I'm learning that isolation is its own kind of death. Slower than a bullet, maybe, but just as final. He flexed his healing shoulder, feeling the pull of scar tissue. This place, these people, you're teaching me how to be alive again in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Ayla was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. My mother used to say that the strongest warriors aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who fall and learn to stand again, carrying the wisdom of their wounds. She looked at him directly. You've fallen, Caleb Rourke. The question is whether you'll use that fall to grow stronger or let it define your limitations. I'm trying to choose the first option. I know, and it shows. She smiled slightly. Even Makia admitted yesterday that you're less useless than he initially believed. High praise indeed. From Makia, it absolutely is. He doesn't give ground easily, especially to someone who represents everything he's lost. Ayla's smile faded. But he's also fair. He sees how hard you work, how you show up every day despite the pain, despite knowing many here would celebrate if you disappeared. That consistency matters to him. The conversation was interrupted by Chaitan's arrival, slightly out of breath. Ayla, your father calls council, asks you to come. You also, Caleb. Caleb and Ayla exchanged glances. Councils were serious business, called only when important decisions needed to be made. Did he say what it's about? Ayla asked. Scouts report activity to the south, more riders, maybe looking for something, or someone. Chaitan's meaning was clear. They found the council already assembled in the largest lodge. Chief Dakota seated at the center, flanked by the tribe's elders. Warriors stood around the perimeter, Makia among them. Everyone turned when Caleb and Ayla entered, the weight of their attention palpable. Dakota gestured for them to sit. Scouts returned an hour ago with troubling news. A group of armed men, 8 this time, were seen 3 days' ride south, questioning travelers, showing a drawing of someone matching Caleb's description. They claimed to be searching for a dangerous criminal. Caleb's stomach tightened. Morrison's father hadn't given up, had sent more hunters when Cobb returned empty-handed. They're looking for me. Obviously, one of the elders said sharply. The question is what we do about it. Do we hand you over to prevent potential conflict? Do we hide you and risk their wrath when they discover our deception? Do we stand and fight if they come here demanding your surrender? We already made this choice once, another elder argued. We chose to protect him. To change that decision now would make us appear weak, indecisive. We chose before violence was certain, the first elder countered. 8 armed men are different than 1 bounty hunter who could be reasoned with. These men may not listen to reason. The debate continued, voices rising and falling, arguments building on arguments. Caleb sat silently, listening to people debate his fate in a language he only partially understood. He caught enough words to follow the general thrust, some arguing for his continued protection, others for expediency, still others for finding a middle path. Finally, Dakota raised his hand for silence. Caleb Rourke, you have heard the situation. What say you? All eyes turned to him. This was another test, Caleb realized, not of his work ethic or his resilience, but of his judgment and his willingness to put the tribe's welfare above his own interests. He stood slowly, feeling the weight of attention like a physical pressure. When he spoke, he chose his words with care, mixing the English most understood with the tribal words he'd learned, showing respect through the attempt even if his pronunciation was still rough. Honored elders, Chief Dakota, warriors of this tribe, I hear your concerns, and they are valid. My presence here has brought danger to your door twice now. First Cobb, now these new hunters. Each time, you've had to choose between your safety and the protection you offered me. He paused, making sure he had their full attention. I will not ask you to make that choice again. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council. Ayla's expression remained carefully neutral, but Caleb caught the tension in her shoulders. If these men come here, Caleb continued, if they threaten this camp or its people, I will surrender myself to them before allowing violence to erupt. Your safety matters more than my freedom. Your children's future matters more than my past. He met Dakota's eyes directly. But I will not run. I will not flee into the night and leave you to face questions about where I went. If I must leave, it will be openly, with honor, after thanking you properly for everything you've given me. The silence that followed was profound. Then Makia spoke, his voice carrying across the lodge. And if we choose not to let you surrender, if we decide your protection is worth the risk, then I would be honored beyond words, and I would stand with you, fight beside you if it came to that, and count myself fortunate to have found people willing to see past what I represent to who I'm trying to become. Dakota stood, his presence commanding immediate silence. The council will deliberate on this matter. Caleb, Ayla, you are dismissed. We will call you when a decision is reached. Outside, the night had fully fallen, stars brilliant in the clear desert sky. Ayla walked a short distance from the council lodge before stopping, her back to Caleb. You meant what you said in there, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Every word. You'd really surrender yourself to those men knowing what they'd do to you, knowing Morrison's father won't care about truth or justice, only revenge? If it meant keeping this tribe safe, yes, without hesitation. Caleb moved to stand beside her, both of them looking up at the stars. These past weeks, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. A sense of purpose, of belonging, of mattering to people beyond just myself. That's not something I'll dishonor by being the cause of bloodshed. Ayla turned to face him, her expression fierce. And what about what you matter to me? To Chaitin, to Grandmother Etu, even to Makia in his grudging way? Do we not get a say in whether you throw your life away? The raw emotion in her voice stopped Caleb cold. He'd known she cared about the success of her father's peace experiment, had invested herself in proving that bridge building between worlds was possible. But this felt like something more personal, more immediate. Ayla, no, listen to me. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the firelight from distant lodges reflected in her eyes. When I chose you that first night, I saw something in you. Not just courage or the ability to face death calmly, but potential. The potential to be the kind of man who builds rather than destroys, who protects rather than takes, who chooses connection over isolation even when isolation is easier. Her hands clenched at her sides. And watching you these past weeks, seeing you work and learn and grow and choose this tribe over your own safety again and again, it's been like watching that potential become real, like watching a seed finally break through hard ground and reach toward the sun. I don't know what to say to that. Then don't say anything. Just don't give up. Don't decide we're not worth fighting for just because fighting is hard. She took a breath, steadying herself. My father's council will choose to protect you. I know them well enough to predict that. They'll see your willingness to sacrifice yourself as proof that you've truly become one of us, and that will make them dig in harder. But there are 8 armed men coming, Caleb, maybe more behind them. And when they arrive, you'll need to be ready to stand for this tribe the way we're standing for you. Before Caleb could respond, the council lodge's entrance flap opened and Chaitin emerged, gesturing for them to return. The deliberation had been swift. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. The elders who'd argued for caution now wore expressions of grim determination. The warriors stood straighter, hands near their weapons. And Dakota himself seemed to have grown more imposing, as if the weight of leadership had condensed into something visible. We have decided, the chief announced. Caleb Rourke has proven himself through action and sacrifice. He has worked without complaint, learned our ways with genuine effort, and shown willingness to put our welfare above his own safety. These qualities, consistency, humility, courage, are what we value in our people. He paused, letting the words settle. Therefore, the council has voted unanimously. Caleb Rourke is under our protection. If these hunters come seeking him, they will be told he is one of us, and we do not surrender our own to outside justice without cause. But Chief, one of the younger warriors protested, 8 armed men will face 50 warriors who know this land better than any outsider, Makia cut in. We have the advantage of terrain, position, and motivation. If they wish to take one of ours, they will pay a price that makes their employer's revenge seem petty in comparison. Dakota nodded. However, we will not be foolish about this. We will prepare defenses, position sentries at greater distances, and ensure that if conflict comes, we meet it from strength, not surprise. He turned to Caleb. You will train with our warriors. Your shoulder has healed enough for basic weapons work. It is time you learn to fight as we fight, not as your people do. I'll do whatever is needed, Chief. Good. Then starting tomorrow at dawn, Makia will oversee your training. He is our best warrior, and if you are to stand with us, you must be able to hold your own. A slight smile touched Dakota's weathered face. Besides, Makia has been looking for an excuse to test you properly. Now he has it. Makia's grin was predatory. Oh yes, we will see what you are made of, white man. No more gentle work repairing fences. Time to learn whether you can truly be one of us. The council dispersed, warriors heading off to begin preparations, elders discussing defensive strategies in low voices. Caleb found himself both honored and terrified. They were choosing to fight for him, to risk themselves for someone who'd been a stranger mere weeks ago. The responsibility of that was staggering. Ayla touched his arm as they left the lodge. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow, Makia will try to break you. He'll push harder than anyone has pushed before, testing not just your body, but your spirit. He needs to know you won't crumble under pressure. I won't. I believe you, but believing and proving are different things. She squeezed his arm once, then released it. Remember, you're not fighting to impress Makia. You're fighting to earn the right to stand beside people willing to die for you. That's a different kind of motivation. She was right, of course. As Caleb lay down to sleep that night, his mind raced with scenarios and possibilities. 8 armed men trained in settler combat tactics. How would tribal warriors, trained in ambush and mobility, fare against that kind of force? What would happen if actual combat erupted? How many people on both sides would die because a rancher's son had lied about an incident in an alley 3 months ago? The weight of it threatened to crush him. But beneath the weight was something else, something he'd thought lost forever when Sarah died. The fierce, burning desire to protect something precious, to stand for something beyond himself, to matter in a way that made the risks worthwhile. He slept fitfully, dreams mixing memory with anticipation, Sarah's face blending with Ayla's, past and present tangling until he couldn't separate them. Dawn came too quickly. Caleb woke to find Chayton already in the lodge, holding what looked like training weapons, a practice bow with a lighter draw weight, blunted arrows, a wooden knife. Makia waits, the young warrior said simply. Bring these. They walked to a section of canyon away from the main camp, where other warriors had already gathered. Makia stood at the center, arms crossed, his scarred chest bare despite the morning chill. When he saw Caleb approach, his expression was unreadable. Strip to the waist, Makia commanded. I need to see how your shoulder moves. Caleb complied, feeling exposed under the weight of watching eyes. His shoulder bore the clear marks of Grandmother Etu's work, a puckered scar where the arrowhead had been removed, pink skin where infection had been burned away. Makia circled him like a predator assessing prey. Can you draw a bow? Somewhat, still painful at full extension, but manageable. We will test this. Makia picked up one of the practice bows and handed it to Caleb. Draw. Full extension. Hold until I say release. Caleb knocked a blunted arrow, drew the string back. Pain flared immediately in his shoulder, the partially healed muscle protesting the strain. He held the position, feeling his arm begin to shake. Hold, Makia commanded. The shaking intensified. Sweat broke out on Caleb's forehead. His shoulder burned like someone had pressed hot iron against the bone. Hold, but... His vision started to gray at the edges. The bow wavered. Release. Caleb let the arrow fly. It went wide, missing the target by a good 3 feet. He lowered the bow, breathing hard, his shoulder throbbing. Pathetic, Makia declared. But there was something in his tone that wasn't quite contempt. But you held longer than I expected. Good. That means we have something to work with. He gestured to the other warriors. Pair up. Caleb, you're with me. What followed was the most grueling physical trial of Caleb's life. Makia put him through drills designed to test every aspect of combat readiness: balance, speed, strength, endurance, pain tolerance. They practiced hand-to-hand combat, Makia demonstrating holds and strikes with barely controlled force. They worked with wooden knives, Makia moving with a fluid grace that made Caleb's attempts look clumsy by comparison. They drilled with bows until Caleb's shoulder was on fire and his hands were cramping. Through it all, Makia offered no encouragement, only correction. Your stance is wrong. Your weight distribution is off. You telegraph your movements. You rely too much on strength, not enough on leverage. Again, again, again. The other warriors watched, some with obvious amusement at seeing the outsider humbled, others with more neutral assessment. Caleb ignored them all, focusing entirely on Makia's instructions, trying to absorb lessons delivered through demonstration and correction rather than patient explanation. By midday, he was covered in bruises and so exhausted he could barely stand. Makia called a break, and Caleb collapsed in the shade, his entire body trembling with fatigue. Chaitin appeared with water and dried meat. "You do well," the young warrior said encouragingly. "Makia usually makes new trainees quit by now." "How can you tell I'm doing well? I haven't landed a single hit on him." "That is not the measure. Makia does not expect you to defeat him. He has 20 years more experience. He expects you not to quit, not to make excuses, not to blame your injury or your unfamiliarity with our methods." Chaitin grinned. "By not quitting, you pass his real test." Caleb drank deeply, letting the cool water soothe his parched throat. Across the training ground, Makia was conferring with the other warriors, gesturing occasionally in Caleb's direction. Whatever they were discussing, it seemed intense. "Chaitin," Caleb said quietly, "if those hunters come here, if it comes to actual fighting, will you promise me something?" "What promise?" "If it looks like people are going to die defending me, you'll knock me unconscious and hand me over. I won't let good people die for my mistakes." Chaitin's expression grew serious. "You do not understand. It's not just about you anymore. It's about what you represent. If we surrender you to outside pressure, we tell the world we have no strength, no conviction, no ability to protect what is ours. Next time, they take more, and more, until we have nothing left to defend." He met Caleb's eyes directly. "You are the line we draw. Not because you are so special, but because we must draw the line somewhere. Better to draw it for someone who proves himself worthy than to never draw it at all." Before Caleb could respond, Makia called them back to training. The afternoon session was somehow even more brutal than the morning. Makia introduced combat scenarios, simulated ambushes where Caleb had to respond under pressure, fighting multiple opponents simultaneously, tracking and stalking exercises that required him to use terrain for advantage. He failed most of the scenarios, got tagged by blunted arrows more times than he could count, was disarmed repeatedly in knife work, made mistakes in tracking that Makia pointed out with scathing efficiency. But he kept trying, kept getting up when knocked down, kept adjusting his approach based on Makia's corrections. And slowly, incrementally, his responses improved. Not to the level of the experienced warriors, but better than his initial attempts. As the sun touched the canyon rim, Makia finally called an end to training. Caleb stood with the other warriors, his body a mass of aches and pains, but something else too. A sense of accomplishment, of having been tested and not found completely wanting. Makia walked over, his expression still stern, but perhaps fractionally less hostile. "You are slow, clumsy, and you rely too much on settler fighting habits. Your injured shoulder limits your effectiveness significantly." He paused. "But you learn, you adapt, and you do not quit when things become difficult. These qualities, they can be built upon." For Makia, this was practically effusive praise. Several of the other warriors nodded in agreement. "Tomorrow we train again," Makia continued, "and the day after, and every day until those hunters arrive or decide to search elsewhere. By the time they come, if they come, you will be able to stand with us properly, not as a liability we must protect, but as a warrior who holds his position." "I'll be ready," Caleb promised. "You had better be, because if fighting starts, there will be no time for hesitation or uncertainty. You will need to act with the same commitment you showed today, but faster and without my guidance." Makia's eyes were hard, but not unkind. "War is not like training. The arrows are real, the knives are sharp, and mistakes end lives. Understand? I understand. Makia nodded once, then turned to address all the warriors present. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we drill defensive positions and coordinated tactics. If these hunters want to fight, we will show them what it means to challenge people who defend their own. The group dispersed, warriors heading back to camp in small clusters, discussing the day's training and speculating about the approaching threat. Caleb walked with Chayton, grateful for the young warrior's easy companionship. They found the camp preparing for potential conflict in a dozen small ways. Women were securing supplies, making sure that if combat erupted, non-combatants could shelter quickly. Older children were being taught evacuation routes and safe positions. Even the youngest were being kept closer to the lodges, their usual free-ranging play curtailed by adult vigilance. Caleb felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. All this preparation, all this disruption to normal life, because of choices he'd made months ago in a town far from here. Ayla found him as he was cleaning up at the river, washing away the day's sweat and dust. She sat on a rock nearby, not speaking at first, just keeping him company in the gathering dusk. Makia says you did well today, she finally said. Makia told you that? Not in those words exactly. He said you were less incompetent than anticipated and possibly trainable, which from him is high praise. She smiled slightly. He also said you have courage and determination, which matter more than natural talent. Caleb dried off and dressed in clean clothes, wincing as fabric rubbed against fresh bruises. I just don't want to be the weak link if fighting actually happens. Don't want to be the reason someone gets hurt trying to protect me. You won't be. Not if you keep training the way you did today. Ayla stood, started walking back toward camp, and Caleb fell into step beside her. But Caleb, there's something you need to understand. Even with training, even with determination and courage, you're still one person. If those 8 hunters arrive and push for conflict, the outcome won't rest entirely on your shoulders. This is bigger than you now. That's what Chayton said, that I represent something beyond just myself. He's right. You represent the choice we made to try something different, to believe that people can change, that bridges can be built, that the cycle of violence and revenge can be broken if someone is brave enough to try. She stopped walking, turned to face him. Do you know what my father said after the council meeting? He said that protecting you isn't really about you at all. It's about proving to ourselves and to the world that we still have the strength to determine our own path, that we're not so beaten down and desperate that we'll compromise our principles at the first sign of pressure. That's a heavy burden to carry. Yes, it is. But you're not carrying it alone anymore. That's the whole point. Ayla reached out, touched the carved stone she'd given him. He'd tied it to a leather cord around his neck, keeping it close. We carry it together, all of us. And together we're strong enough to face whatever comes. They stood there in the fading light, 2 people from vastly different worlds who'd found unexpected common ground. Around them, the camp continued its preparations, a community steeling itself for potential conflict while hoping for peace. Thank you, Caleb said quietly, for choosing me, for believing I could be more than what I was, for giving me a reason to be better. Ayla's expression softened. Thank you for proving me right, for showing that my choice wasn't foolish optimism, but reasonable faith in human potential. She squeezed his arm once, then stepped back. Now come on. Grandmother Etu wants to check your shoulder, make sure Makia didn't completely destroy you on the first day. And then you need to eat and rest. Tomorrow will be harder. She was right, of course. The following days were a relentless cycle of training, preparation, and waiting. Makia pushed Caleb and the other warriors through increasingly complex drills, building muscle memory and coordination. They practiced defensive formations, coordinated bow work, tactical retreats, and ambush positions. Every scenario designed around the assumption that they'd face better armed but less mobile opponents who didn't know the terrain. Caleb's skills improved daily. His draw became smoother, his aim more consistent. The knife work started to feel less alien, more like an extension of his own instincts. He learned to read the other warriors' movements, to anticipate and coordinate rather than fight independently. His shoulders still ached, still limited his full range of motion, but he learned to compensate, to use positioning and strategy where strength failed. And through it all, the scouts kept watch, reporting the slow approach of the armed men searching for Caleb Rourke. They were methodical, these hunters, questioning every traveler, checking every settlement, following a search pattern that suggested military training, or at least professional thoroughness. They were coming. It was just a matter of when. The hunters arrived on the 8th day, just after dawn, when mist still clung to the canyon floor like ghostly fingers. The scout who spotted them came running into camp, his breathing hard and urgent, reporting 8 mounted men approaching from the southeast pass. Caleb was with Makya and the other warriors, already in position along the defensive perimeter they'd established. They'd known this moment was coming, had prepared for it with meticulous care, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. His heart hammered against his ribs as he checked his bow for the 10th time that morning, making sure the string was properly waxed, the arrows within easy reach. "Steady," Makya said quietly beside him. "Fear is natural. What matters is what you do with it." Caleb nodded, forcing his breathing to slow. Around him, the other warriors were equally tense but controlled, their faces painted with ochre and ash, their weapons ready but not yet raised. They'd positioned themselves in strategic locations throughout the canyon, some visible, serving as the tribe's public face, others hidden in elevated positions where they could provide cover fire if negotiations failed. Chief Dakota stood at the camp's entrance with Ayla beside him, both dressed in full ceremonial regalia. This was theater as much as diplomacy, a statement that the tribe took this confrontation seriously, met it from strength and tradition rather than fear. The 8 riders appeared through the morning mist like specters materializing from nightmare. They were heavily armed, rifles across their saddles, pistols at their hips, the hard confidence of men who'd faced violence before and expected to face it again. But unlike Cobb, these men had a different quality, more mercenary than lawman, more interested in results than justice. Their leader was a lean man with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, giving his face a perpetually cruel expression. He reined in his horse 30 feet from where Dakota stood, his companions spreading out in a loose formation that suggested military training. "Morning," the scarred man said, his voice carrying across the space. "Name's Garrett Pike. I'm looking for a fugitive. White man named Caleb Rourke. Been told he might have passed through this area." Dakota's expression remained neutral. "Many people pass through these lands. What business do you have with this man?" "Legal business. He's wanted for assault and robbery out of Cedar Falls. There's a substantial reward for his capture." Pike's eyes swept across the visible warriors, assessing threats. "Now, I know another hunter already came through here looking for him. Harlan Cobb. Heard he left empty-handed, claimed the trail went cold. But see, Mr. Morrison, the man whose son was attacked, he's not satisfied with that answer. Sent us to search more thoroughly." "And what makes you think your search will be more successful than Mr. Cobb's?" Pike's smile was cold. "Because I'm more persistent, and less inclined to take no for an answer." He shifted in his saddle, hand resting casually near his rifle. "So I'll ask you straight. Is Caleb Rourke in this camp?" The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Caleb could see it from his hidden position 20 yards away, could feel the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. This was the moment of decision, the point where words would determine whether blood was spilled. Dakota stood absolutely still, his presence radiating authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Caleb Rourke is under my protection. He is part of this tribe, accepted through proper ceremony, and I do not surrender my people to outside authority without cause." Pike's expression hardened. "With respect, Chief, that's not how the law works. You can't just claim someone as yours and expect that to override legal warrants. Your law, not mine." Dakota's stance didn't shift. "My law says that once someone joins our tribe, they are ours to protect and ours to judge. If you believe Caleb Rourke has committed crimes, then present your evidence to me, and I will ensure justice is served according to our ways." "That's not acceptable. Morrison wants him tried in a proper court, not some tribal council." "Then Mr. Morrison will be disappointed." Dakota's eyes were flint. "I have heard Caleb's account of what happened in Cedar Falls. A drunken man beating a helpless worker, Caleb intervening to stop the violence, the attacker falling and injuring himself through his own unsteady movements. This is not assault and robbery. This is a man standing against cruelty and being punished for it by those with wealth and influence." Pike's jaw tightened. "You weren't there. You don't know what really happened. Neither were you. You only know what Morrison's son claimed, and that account is self-serving at best. Ayla stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. But even if we accepted your version of events, it changes nothing. Caleb Rourke is one of us now, and we do not hand over our own to satisfy the revenge fantasies of angry settlers. One of Pike's men leaned over, whispered something urgent. Pike listened, then shook his head slightly. When he looked back at Dakota and Ayla, his expression had shifted, still hard, but with a calculating quality that suggested he was reassessing the situation. "I count maybe 20 warriors visible," Pike said slowly. "Figure there's probably more hidden in the rocks, covering us right now. And I'm guessing every one of them is a decent shot with those bows." He was quiet for a moment, doing the math. "Here's the thing, Chief. I don't want a bloodbath any more than you do. Dead bodies mean questions, investigations, maybe federal troops getting involved. Bad for everyone." "Then we agree on something. So here's what I'm proposing. Let me talk to Rourke. Face to face, just the two of us. I hear his side of things, get a sense of whether Morrison's account is accurate or exaggerated. If I believe him, if he convinces me he was acting in defense of another rather than committing unprovoked assault, then we ride out and report we couldn't find him. And if you don't believe him," Ayla challenged, "then we have a problem that'll need solving." Pike's eyes were hard. "But at least we'll have tried diplomacy before resorting to violence." Dakota considered this, weighing options. Finally, he turned to Ayla and spoke in their language, the exchange rapid and intense. Caleb couldn't make out all the words from his position, but he caught enough to understand the chief was asking his daughter's opinion, valuing her judgment. Ayla responded, her voice firm, then turned and looked directly at the spot where Caleb was hidden. Even from this distance, he could read the message in her eyes. "This is your choice. We'll support you either way, but you must decide." Caleb took a breath, steadying himself. Then he stood up from his concealed position and walked forward into the open. The reaction was immediate. Pike's men reached for their weapons. The visible tribal warriors raised their bows. The tension ratcheted so high that one wrong move would ignite everything. "Hold!" Pike commanded his men. Then to the warriors, "Everyone stand down. I gave my word. Just talking, nothing more." Caleb walked past Dakota and Ayla, giving them a slight nod of acknowledgement, then stopped about 10 feet from Pike's horse. This close, he could see the calculation in the hunter's eyes, the assessment of threat and opportunity. "I'm Caleb Rourke," he said simply. Pike dismounted, handing his reins to one of his men. He approached Caleb with the loose-limbed walk of a man comfortable with violence, stopping just outside arm's reach. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Rourke. Morrison's willing to pay good money for your return. Makes me curious what really happened that night in Cedar Falls." "I'll tell you the same thing I told Harlan Cobb. I was passing through town, heard sounds from an alley, shouting, the impact of fists on flesh. Found Daniel Morrison drunk and beating a Chinese laborer who was already unconscious. I pulled Morrison off, told him to go sleep it off. He came at me, swinging. I pushed him away. He stumbled, fell, hit his head on a hitching post." Caleb's voice was steady, matter of fact. "I checked to make sure he was breathing, then left before the town watch arrived because I knew exactly how that confrontation would be interpreted." "The laborer. Can he corroborate your story?" "If you can find him. He ran as soon as Morrison was down, probably terrified he'd be blamed for the whole thing. I don't even know his name." Pike studied him for a long moment. "Morrison's version says you attacked his son without provocation, beat him severely, and stole money from his pockets while he was unconscious. Morrison's version is a lie designed to protect his son's reputation and punish someone who made him look weak." Caleb met Pike's eyes directly. "But you already knew that, didn't you? You've been doing this long enough to recognize when a story doesn't add up. Morrison's son has a history of drunken violence. The town watch has been called to deal with him before. This time, someone fought back, and his father can't tolerate that." Pike's expression gave nothing away. "What makes you think I care about the truth? I'm paid to bring you in, not to judge your innocence. Because if all you cared about was the money, you wouldn't have asked to talk. You would have just tried to take me by force and dealt with the consequences." Caleb gestured toward the watching warriors. "You're smart enough to know that would end badly for everyone. So you're looking for a reason, either to justify taking me in or to justify letting me go. I'm giving you that reason. You're awfully confident for a man surrounded by armed hunters. Not confident, just honest. Caleb's voice dropped lower. I spent 3 years running from myself, Pike. Running from grief and loss and the person I became after my wife died. Ended up here by accident, got chosen for something I didn't understand, and found people willing to see past what I represented to who I could become. He glanced back at the tribe, at Ayla standing beside her father, at the warriors ready to defend him. I'm done running. If you genuinely believe I deserve to hang for defending a helpless man from a drunk who was beating him to death, then take me in and live with that decision. But if you have any doubt, any at all, then walk away and let me build something worth the second chance I've been given. The silence that followed was profound. Pike's face remained unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of something that might have been respect or might have been recognition of a kindred quality. Finally, Pike turned and walked back to his horse. He swung into the saddle, gathering his reins, then looked down at Caleb from that elevated position. Here's what I think happened in Cedar Falls. I think Morrison's son was drunk and violent, just like you said. I think you intervened, probably saved that laborer's life, and the kid got hurt through his own stupidity. I think his father, rather than accept his son's responsibility, decided to buy himself some revenge. Then why even come here? Because I took his money and gave my word I'd search thoroughly, which I did. I questioned travelers, checked settlements, followed every lead. Pike's eyes swept across the assembled tribe. And when I arrived at this camp, I found no sign of Caleb Rourke. Just a tribal community protecting their own and making it clear that trespassing on their lands would be met with appropriate force. Understanding dawned. Pike was giving him an out, offering the same choice Cobb had made, but for different reasons. You're saying I was never here. I'm saying my search came up empty. The trail went cold somewhere in the territories, probably got lost in the backcountry where tracking becomes impossible. Pike turned his horse, his men following suit. Of course, that means if you ever show your face in settler territory again, if you ever leave the protection of these people, Morrison will send someone else. Someone maybe less inclined toward reasonable conversation. Understood. Pike nodded once, then addressed Dakota. Chief, I apologize for the intrusion. Appears our information was incorrect. We'll be moving on. Your courtesy is noted, Dakota replied formally. Safe travels to you and your men. As the hunters began to ride away, Pike paused and looked back one final time at Caleb. That laborer you saved? Found out later his name was Wei Chen. He made it to a mission hospital, recovered from his injuries, told the priests what really happened that night. They wrote a letter to the territorial governor, but Morrison's got enough influence to bury it. Pike's scarred face might have held the ghost of a smile. But I heard about it. Made me curious about the kind of man who'd risk everything for a stranger. Figured anyone willing to do that deserved a chance to tell his side. Then he was gone, the 8 riders disappearing back into the morning mist, leaving only hoofprints in the dust as evidence they'd been there at all. For a long moment, nobody moved. The entire camp seemed frozen, unable to quite believe the crisis had passed without bloodshed. Then Dakota raised his hand in a gesture of dismissal, and the tension broke like a snapping rope. Warriors lowered their weapons, breathing out relief and residual adrenaline. Children who'd been kept hidden emerged cautiously, sensing the danger had passed. Women who'd prepared for the worst began to relax, though their eyes remained wary. Caleb stood in the center of it all, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He'd prepared for violence, steeled himself for sacrifice, and instead found mercy from an unexpected source. Wei Chen, a name he'd never known, attached to a man whose life he'd saved without thinking, without knowing the consequences would chase him across territories and into this canyon. Ayla approached, her expression a complex mixture of relief and something deeper. You were willing to go with them, she said quietly. If it meant protecting the tribe, yes. But they chose to let you stay. Both Cobb and now Pike, they could have forced the issue, risked violence to claim the bounty. Instead, they chose to believe you, to see the truth beneath Morrison's lies. She touched his arm. Do you understand what that means? That I got lucky twice? No. That you're the kind of person worth believing in. The kind who inspires others to choose mercy over profit, truth over convenient lies. Her eyes held his. My father saw that in you. I saw it. And now even hardened bounty hunters see it. Maybe it's time you started seeing it in yourself. Before Caleb could respond, the tribe began to gather around them. First the children, emboldened by safety, asking rapid-fire questions about the scary men and whether they'd really come to take Caleb away. Then the warriors, Makia among them, their expressions showing grudging approval of how Caleb had handled himself. Finally the elders, moving with careful dignity, acknowledging with their presence that something significant had transpired. Chief Dakota raised his hands for silence. When the camp quieted, he spoke in their language, his voice carrying across the canyon. Caleb caught fragments, words for courage, honesty, belonging, trust. The chief was telling the story of what had just happened, contextualizing it within the tribe's larger narrative. Then Dakota switched to English, clearly wanting Caleb to understand every word. Twice now, armed men have come seeking to take one of our own. Twice, they have left empty-handed, choosing to honor truth over gold. This is not accident. This is not luck. This is the result of one man's character proving stronger than the lies told about him. He stepped down from his platform and approached Caleb directly. When my daughter first chose you, many questioned her wisdom. When I agreed to shelter you, many questioned mine. We were told we were inviting danger, harboring someone who would bring violence to our door. And they were right, Caleb said quietly. I did bring danger. You brought opportunity, Dakota corrected. Opportunity for us to prove we are still strong enough to defend our choices. Opportunity to show that we determine who belongs among us, not outside authorities with their warrants and their wealth. Opportunity to demonstrate that sometimes faith in human potential is rewarded. The chief placed both hands on Caleb's shoulders, a gesture of formal significance. You came to us as a captive. You stayed as a guest. You trained as a student. Today you stand as one of us, fully, completely, without reservation. He spoke the next words in both languages, making sure everyone understood. Caleb Rourke, you are no longer a stranger seeking shelter. You are family, bound to us by choice and courage, and the trials we have faced together. The declaration rippled through the assembled tribe. Some faces showed joy, others acceptance, a few still held reservations. But the collective weight had tipped. Caleb had been tested in ways that mattered, and he had not been found wanting. Grandmother Etu stepped forward, carrying a bundle wrapped in soft deerskin. She handed it to Caleb with ceremony, speaking in her language. Ayla translated. She says these belong to her grandson, lost to fever 2 winters ago. She wants you to have them. His bow, his knife, his medicine bag. She says he would have liked you, would have approved of your courage. Caleb unwrapped the bundle with trembling hands. The bow was beautiful, carved from seasoned wood and decorated with intricate patterns. The knife was perfectly balanced, the blade obsidian sharp. The medicine bag contained herbs and small tokens whose significance he didn't yet understand but felt honored to receive. I don't know what to say, he managed, his voice rough with emotion. Say you will honor his memory by living well, Grandmother Etu replied in halting English. By protecting this tribe, by growing into the man you are becoming. That is thanks enough. One by one, others approached with gifts or gestures of acceptance. Chaitin presented him with arrows he'd made himself, each one perfectly fletched. Makia gave a curt nod that somehow conveyed more respect than lengthy speeches. Even some who'd been openly hostile before offered small signs of grudging acceptance, a touch on the shoulder, a word in their language, inclusion in their circle. Through it all, Ayla remained nearby, watching with an expression that Caleb was beginning to recognize. Pride, yes, but also something more personal, something that made his heart beat faster despite the exhaustion and emotional overwhelm. As the formal ceremonies wound down and people began to return to their daily tasks, Ayla guided Caleb away from the crowd, toward a quiet spot overlooking the canyon. They sat on a sun-warmed rock, looking out at the vast landscape stretching to distant horizons. How does it feel? She asked. To finally belong somewhere again? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, searching for words adequate to the feeling. Terrifying, he finally said. When Sarah died, I convinced myself that belonging was the problem. That connection meant vulnerability, that caring meant inevitable loss. I spent 3 years building walls, keeping everyone at a distance, telling myself isolation was strength. And now? Now I know I was wrong. Isolation isn't strength, it's surrender. It's choosing slow death over the risk of living. He looked at her, this fierce woman who'd chosen him when she had every reason not to. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just a place or a purpose, but permission to try again, to believe that starting over was possible. Ayla's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. You gave me something too, she said softly. Proof that my father's dream wasn't naive foolishness, that bridges between our worlds could be built, that people could change and grow and become more than their origins suggested. Her thumb traced circles on his palm. I chose you because I saw potential. But watching that potential become reality, watching you transform from a broken drifter into someone my people trust to stand beside them, that's been the most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed. I'm still broken in some ways, still carry scars that won't ever fully heal. We all do. The question isn't whether we carry scars, but whether we let them define our limitations or inform our growth. She turned to face him more fully. Caleb, when I lost my brothers, when I watched my mother die, I thought I understood loss. But it made me hard, made me see the world as a place of inevitable pain where the best you could hope for was to protect what little remained. You've taught me something different. What's that? That loss can also teach us what truly matters. That grief, properly honored, can make us more compassionate rather than more closed. That the people we've lost would want us to keep living, keep loving, keep building something worth the sacrifice they made. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. My mother always said that the strongest trees grow in the windiest places. The struggle makes them resilient. You've been tested by winds that would have broken most men, and instead of breaking, you've learned to bend without falling. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, like a door long rusted shut finally creaking open. For 3 years, he'd carried Sarah's memory as a weight, as evidence of everything he'd lost. But sitting here with Ayla, overlooking this canyon that had become home, he realized Sarah would have wanted this for him, would have wanted him to find happiness again, to build something new without forgetting what came before. Sarah would have liked you, he said quietly, would have appreciated your strength, your refusal to accept easy answers, your commitment to protecting your people, even when it cost you something. I wish I could have known her. In a way you did. Everything I'm trying to be, the man willing to stand for something, willing to protect others, willing to build rather than destroy. That comes from what she taught me. She believed people could be better than their worst impulses, that communities mattered more than individual gain. You're living proof she was right. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, warming the canyon and burning away the last traces of morning mist. Around them, the camp returned to its normal rhythms, children playing, warriors training, women working on daily tasks. Life continuing in its eternal dance, made richer by the crisis survived and the bonds strengthened. What happens now? Caleb finally asked. Pike said I can't ever return to settler territory without risking Morrison sending someone else. Then you stay here. Build a life among us, learn our ways completely, not just as a guest, but as a full member of the tribe. Ayla's voice held certainty. Unless, is that not what you want? It's exactly what I want. It feels almost too good to be true. Like I'm waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop. That's the voice of your old life talking. The one where you expected loss and prepared for disappointment. She squeezed his hand. But this is a different life. One where you're surrounded by people who chose to fight for you, who saw you worth protecting. Trust that. Trust us. Trust yourself. Over the following weeks, Caleb did exactly that. He threw himself into tribal life with complete commitment, learning not just the language and skills, but the deeper patterns of thought and relationship that defined the community. He trained daily with Makia and the other warriors, his abilities growing until he could hold his own in most confrontations. He worked alongside the women preserving meat for winter, learning the careful processes that would sustain the tribe through lean months. He sat with the elders, listening to stories that stretched back generations, understanding how the past informed the present. And slowly, incrementally, the last walls around his heart came down. It happened in small moments, Chayton teaching him a particularly complex bow technique, and Caleb finally mastering it, both of them whooping with joy. Grandmother Atu nodding approval as she checked his shoulder, declaring the wound fully healed and the scar well formed. The children pulling him into their games, accepting him so completely they forgot he'd ever been an outsider. Makia clapping him on the shoulder after a particularly good performance in training and saying simply, "You are warrior now." But the most significant moment came one evening when Ayla brought him to a cliff overlooking the canyon where her family had scattered her mother's ashes. They stood in the fading light, and Ayla told him stories about the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her strength and compassion in equal measure, who'd believed peace was possible even as she watched her world shrink around her. "She would have loved seeing what you've become," Ayla said, "would have seen it as proof that her hope wasn't wasted." Caleb looked out at the vast landscape, feeling the weight of all those who'd come before, all those who'd fought to preserve this way of life against overwhelming odds. "I hope I'm worthy of that hope." "You are." And Caleb, she turned to face him, her expression open in a way he'd never seen before. "I need you to know something. When I chose you that first night, it was strategic, political, a calculated risk designed to serve my father's peace initiative." Her hand found his cheek, her touch gentle. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about politics or strategy. It became about you, about us, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, two broken people from different worlds could heal each other. Caleb's breath caught. He'd felt it too, this growing connection that transcended gratitude or friendship. But hearing her voice, it made it real in a way nothing else could. "I love you," he said simply. The words felt right, felt true, felt like the culmination of everything that had happened since the moment she'd chosen him. "I love this place, these people, the life we're building together, and I love you for making it all possible." Ayla smiled, and it transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "I love you too. And I choose you again, Caleb Rourke, not as political statement or tribal obligation, but as my partner, my equal, my heart's companion." They kissed as the sun set over the canyon, two people who'd found each other across impossible divides, who'd chosen connection over isolation, hope over despair, building over breaking. And in that kiss was the promise of all the tomorrows they'd face together. The seasons turned. Winter came to the canyon, harsh and testing, and Caleb weathered it alongside his tribe, learning the rhythms of survival when the world turned cold and resources grew scarce. He proved himself in the hunts that fed the camp, in the watches that protected against raiders, in the council meetings where decisions were made about the tribe's future. Spring brought renewal, and with it, a ceremony. Chief Dakota formally adopted Caleb into the tribe, giving him a name in their language that meant "stands firm when tested." It was more than he'd ever hoped for, more than he'd ever thought possible when he'd knelt in the dust months before, expecting death. And through it all, Ayla remained beside him, his partner in every sense of the word, hunting companion, sparring partner, council advisor, and the person he fell asleep beside each night and woke to each morning. They built a lodge together, raising it with help from the entire tribe, creating a space that was uniquely theirs while remaining connected to the larger community. 1 year after the day Garrett Pike had ridden away, Caleb stood at the canyon's edge with Ayla, watching the sun rise over land that had become home in the deepest sense of the word. His shoulder bore a permanent scar from the arrow wound, but it no longer pained him. Just reminded him how far he'd come, how much he'd survived, how thoroughly his life had transformed. "Do you ever miss it?" Ayla asked quietly. "Your old life? The settler world you came from?" Caleb considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss small things. Coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Books I'll never read again. The sound of a train whistle in the distance." He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of sage and smoke that clung to her hair. "But I don't miss being that person, isolated, grief-stricken, drifting without purpose. That man died in the dust the day you chose me. The man standing here now is someone different, someone better. Not better, just healed, just whole again. Maybe that's the same thing." They stood together as the sun cleared the horizon, painting the canyon in shades of gold and amber. Below them, the camp was waking, children emerging from lodges, warriors preparing for morning training, elders gathering to discuss the day's tasks, life continuing in its beautiful, messy, precious complexity. Caleb had come to this place as a captive, certain his story was ending. Instead, he'd found it was just beginning, had discovered that the human capacity for transformation was greater than he'd imagined, that bridges could be built between the most unlikely people, that choosing connection over isolation was the bravest thing a broken person could do. He'd lost everything once, had carried that loss like a stone around his neck for 3 bitter years. But Ayla and her people had taught him something Sarah would have wanted him to know, that loss didn't have to be the end of the story, that new chapters could be written if you were brave enough to turn the page, that belonging wasn't something you found. It was something you built, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. Morrison might send more hunters eventually. The fragile peace between their worlds might shatter despite everyone's best efforts. The future held no guarantees, only possibilities. But standing there with Ayla beside him, surrounded by people who'd become family, protecting a way of life worth defending, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. He felt hope. And hope, he'd learned, was the most dangerous and most necessary thing a human could carry. Dangerous because it made you vulnerable, made you invest in outcomes you couldn't control. Necessary because without it, you were just surviving rather than living. Caleb Rourke chose to live. He'd been captured by the frontier's law, tested by its brutal realities, and transformed by people who saw past what he represented to who he could become. He'd faced death and chosen life, faced isolation and chosen connection, faced his grief and learned to carry it without being crushed by its weight. And in the end, he discovered the simplest and most profound truth, that we are all broken in our own ways, all carrying scars from battles fought and lost. But with the right people beside us, in the right place, at the right time, those scars can become sources of strength rather than shame. The sun rose higher, burning away the last shadows, and Caleb turned toward camp with Ayla's hand in his. There was work to do, training to complete, a community to serve. There was life to live, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful fullness. He was ready for it, all of it. Together, they walked down from the cliff's edge toward the camp, toward home, toward whatever future they would build with their own hands and hearts, an unwavering commitment to each other. The story that had begun with capture and fear had transformed into one of belonging and love. And in the warm morning light of a new day, that felt like the only ending worth having.